Hello, one and all, and welcome to episode 32 of ThROH The Years, the podcast that reviews Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning. As always, hosted by two wonderful gentlemen, me, Trevor Dame, and as always, the creator, the mind behind the show, Matt Feuerstein. Matt, we're made it to the end of 2003.
Yeah, nobody believes that I'm the mind behind the show, but you keep saying it, and I'll just keep taking credit for it. I am the mind, like that famous, popular, beloved movie Megamind that everyone loves. That cartoon about the guy with the giant brain that everyone definitely saw. I did not expect a Megamind reference in this show. Did you?
No, that's really what sets us apart, I think.
Yes. That and only that. Otherwise, we're just like every other podcast. Hello to everybody listening. Welcome to the end of 2003. I'm very excited to have finally gotten through 2003. It was a long year for me. I had one semester in college that was pretty good. I had one that wasn't so great. But I'm really looking forward to 2004. I really think that we could beat George W. Bush this time.
Simpler time. It's crazy that now I look back and I go, oh, those were the days.
Yeah, I mean, I guess comparatively they were the days, but they were also pretty bad in their own ways. So I think the days have just mostly been bad, I think is what we're really getting at here.
Nothing like starting the podcast on an extremely bittersweet note, but things will get sweeter because for those who have not followed, this is the second time ever we've reached the end of a year of Ring of Honor, which means not only will we review the final show of 2003, Final Battle 2003, but after the end of the review, you almost get like an extra bonus content because we will be doing some year-end awards, looking over what other people thought about it, maybe summing up the year a little bit. We did this for Final Battle 2002, so it's just a little extra thing where we kind of wrap everything up. So that'll come. We'll give you the whole regular show first, and then that'll be tacked on at the end. But one thing we have to do is plug the Pro Wrestling Only Podcast Network, and rather than do the pre-written thing, I'm going to just do it to celebrate the end of the year. I'm going to do it the way we used to, Matt. Just off the dome, I'm going to praise this network because we have something very specific, I think, to praise for the network this time. If you wanted more Matt Feuerstein, and who doesn't want more Matt Feuerstein?
Everyone doesn't.
Oh, not me. Can't be everyone because I want more. Because Matt, if you're not listening to the other shows on the network, shame on you, because one thing you've missed, apart from a lot of good shows, is Matt was on the Pro Wrestling Super Show. They did a whole Rumble draft episode where a few guys, including Matt, all picked, they did a snake-style draft where they picked matches from the different Royal Rumbles through history. They had rules like you could only do one of any title match, only do one Rumble match on your card, so you couldn't have like a show with 4 Rumble matches. And I listened to it, and I thought it was a delightful show, and it was a really, Matt, one, you did a great job, and all of you did, but also, I thought it was a really great way to revisit, like, the history of a pay-per-view without just doing the usual, here's the show, then we're going to the next year, then we're going to the next year. I felt like you still got, like, a good kind of, here's, like, the greatest hits of Royal Rumbles, but in a different format.
Well, thank you for that. I had a really great time being on the show. I highly recommend any show that is hosted and put together by Stephen Graham. He's great. He has a lot of great ideas, and he's in a lot of different shows on the Pro Wrestling Only Podcast Network. So shout out to him, and thank you for having me on, and thank you to anybody who listened, and vote for my card, or don't. That's fine. Whatever.
Yes. Oh, yeah. That's the other thing we should mention. It was actually an audience interactive show, like Taboo Tuesday, because Steven put on his Twitter a poll afterwards of here are the cards. Which person do you think did the best? So obviously, listen to the show first. Be fair. But if you come to the genius conclusion that Matt's was the best, then vote for Matt's show.
Thank you.
But anyway, yeah, great. So lots of great shows on the Pro Wrestling Only Network. You should be listening to them, covering so many great topics. And I also feel like we should plug one other show that I have on my podcast queue. I haven't had time to listen to it yet. It is not part of the Pro Wrestling Only Podcast Network, but there is a new podcast that reviews PWG show by show from the beginning. And I don't know, like, what idiots are going to review old indie wrestling promotion show by show from the beginning? That would be that's never going to work. But if you want to give it a try, journey through Gorilla Island. And again, I haven't listened to the first episode yet, but I know some of the people, I follow them on Twitter who are part of the hosts, and I have a feeling it's probably going to be fantastic.
I actually am just learning about this right now, so thank you for that. I am definitely going to listen. I am, and it's going to spread the word about it. That is exciting. I can't wait to listen.
Yeah, so again, always, I think there should be more. I think there's still fertile ground that hasn't been dug up with a shovel on. I don't know where that was going. But, for independent wrestling podcasts that are kind of visiting, I guess, the first golden age or the first boom, we kind of went through the second boom, I would say, in the last few years. But that early to mid 2000s, I feel like, CZW, IWA Mid-South, Jersey All-Pro, there's still like some really interesting things that could be talked about, and would love to hear more people do podcasts on them. But
that era of indie wrestling was just beyond fascinating, and like you said, there was so much going on. And anytime I see somebody, like I know like Rob Naylor will frequently upload clips of various indies from the early 2000s, and there's so much interesting stuff, whether it's local shows in the New York area, or the PWG and Pro Wrestling Epic and Pro Wrestling Iron and the different California stuff, to the Midwest stuff like IWA Mid-South, and then you got the CZWs of the world, even XPW stuff. There was just so much interesting stuff going on in the early 2000s in the indies. It was an incredible time. So yeah, any podcast that focuses on that era is going to be something I'm going to run to.
Yeah. And again, while we're plugging these kind of podcasts and Stephen Graham and our podcast network, something that fits the Venn diagram of all those things, one more time we'll plug Stephen Graham's great new Shimmer Herstory podcast, which is a great podcast about the history of Shimmer. So
the history of David Schwimmer?
Did you see this week the Nick Cage meme where if you put Nick Cage's face on David Schwimmer, it just looks more like David Schwimmer?
I did not, but I did see that there was a new Dave Meltzer controversy about how popular Friends was in England on Twitter. So it's like all of this stuff ties in together.
Oh God, I love that stuff. But so before we get to, this is the longest notes I've ever put together for a show between the year-end stuff and lots of news about Final Battle 2003. But we have like two things I think we should get to before we cover the show proper. The first thing is a brief update on a previous show. On a recent show, we covered War of the Wire, which had the second ever Homicide, Steve Corino, big bloody feud match. Not their second match, that would be their third actually, but the second good one. And Owls 2004 on Twitter reminded me of something I forgot to put in the notes, to my dismay. He wrote, "Great episode, as always. If I recall, the barbed wire match was a replacement for some tag match involving Abdullah the Butcher and Homicide." I did have this in my notes. I forget. It was one of the shows on that double shot. Originally, there was supposed to be one of the main events was supposed to be a Dream Partners match where it would be Homicide re-teaming with Abdullah the Butcher against Steve Corino and some Dream Partner. I don't know if it was ever announced or if there was one. But I guess Abdullah the Butcher got a better offer from an All Japan tour, which is kind of ironic considering the show we're covering today, and had to cancel the show. And I forget which show it was, but I think it might have been War of the Wire. So it might have been that we got Homicide and Steve Corino in the barbed wire match because of Abdullah the Butcher canceling.
That is a weird story that I didn't know about. But about War of the Wire, one opportunity I missed was to make this joke, which is that I wish at the time that my grandmother was a Ring of Honor fan so she could say, "Did you see War of the Wire?" War of the Wire.
It was wonderful. And then the other...
That's so stupid.
Every time you say something is stupid, I think it's 8 times out of 10 something I'm thinking, that's one of the best things that's ever happened on this podcast.
Oh, God.
It's a good, the way we line up on that.
We both have terrible senses of humor. It's perfect.
And now for a sharp right turn, we have to get something a little more serious because I have kind of a correction, or maybe not even a correction as much as I feel like I have to make amends for something. A bunch of shows ago, we got into the story of Steve Carino having to miss a show because he got into legal trouble, ended up spending a couple weeks in prison or jail. And the only side of the story I had, and I think I even said this is just one side of the story, but still, I gave Steve Carino talked about it extensively on an old RF video podcast. He made it sound like this was a jealous ex-girlfriend and she completely framed him, and that everyone from the newspapers and the local TV station, they were all going to have to apologize. He was going to prove it all wrong, and that he was even going to sue them. And we just gave their side of the story. And the only reason I only gave his side of the story was because it was interesting and extensive, and I had it, and I did not have the other side of the story. Well, one of the problems was sometimes I only am reading. I'm trying to read farther ahead in my note research, but I only read so far ahead. And if I had read further ahead before we did that episode months ago, I would have gotten the other side of the story, which I will just read now from the Pro Wrestling Observer, which came out, or just Wrestling Observer. I don't know why I added pro, but
it's a different newsletter.
it's a much more professional grade, much more expensive. Paper's a much nicer stock, but this is from the Observer at the time, around this period, and I think it kind of gives you the other side of the story. And again, the truth might be in the middle, but this is the Observer. Steve Carino pled guilty on forgery and access device fraud on charges that he had bilked an ex-girlfriend out of $12,100 this past week. Carino, 30, was given 1 year of probation and placed into the Montgomery County, Pennsylvania Accelerated Rehabilitative Disposition Program. Carino wasn't given any time because he came to court with a check for $13,100 to ex-girlfriend Cheryl Kennard to cover the amount plus $1,000 in travel expenses to her since she flew in from California to get the check. Kennard told police in April that Carino had used her credit card without authorization and forged her name on checks between June and December of 2001 after ECW went out of business. She was happy with the outcome because she was fully compensated, and Carino has been held responsible. Carino had professed innocence publicly all along and said in a website statement that he couldn't say any more about the case, but that local newspaper reporters were wrong. Carino had claimed reports and newspaper stories were wrong in the past, and retractions would be printed. None were, and subsequent stories, including this week, listed that Carino had faced a maximum 117 years in prison if he was convicted of all the charges against him in a trial. Carino and Kennard were living together in Skippack, Pennsylvania at the time, when Carino was charged with running charges on her credit card and forging a check. So, again, at the time, I believe that our video shoot interview with Steve Carino I referenced many episodes ago was between his jailing and this event. Clearly, it puts it in a different light, the fact that Carino ended up pleading guilty and paying her back all her money. So, just want to be fair. And also, Matt, maybe I just don't know the intricacies of the legal system, but it's crazy that he paid her an extra $1,000 to fly to pick up the check. Seems like it would have been more convenient just to FedEx it for everybody involved.
I don't know. I when it comes to legal stuff like this, I try not to comment at all because who the hell knows? But
I don't want to get anyone in trouble. Again, we don't know whose side, but I just felt like I presented the one side on that episode, and it's only fair. It would be weird if I ended up learning this and did not present the follow-up. Well, okay, I talked about how he professed his innocence, but then months later, he did plead guilty. So now we have both sides. You decide what you want to think. Doesn't matter. Moving on, this was the Final Battle 2003 was the biggest show Ring of Honor had done in its history up to that point, and one of the things that made it the biggest is it not just did a regular full show, they did another one of those afternoon kind of convention cards, and we did not watch that. It's on the out-of-print Ring of Honor Uncensored DVD if you would like to hunt that down, but I thought I'd give the results, and there was a few interesting notes and names on that show. First off, the Observer wrote, Ring of Honor also held an afternoon showcase card, which drew 550 fans at $5 per head to see largely prelim matches, but was actually larger than any crowd the company had done in Philadelphia previously. I'll also say Mike Johnson was there live, and he eyeballed that crowd for the convention card at 800. I'd probably more go to the Observer because they probably got it directly from Ring of Honor, and if Ring of Honor was telling them 550, it was probably 550 or less, but All Japan dudes were apparently signing autographs for $10 a head during this whole convention card. And here are the matches. Sumi Sakai, last year's Ring of Honor Women's Champion, defeated Allison Danger. Josh Daniels defeated Puma, who some of you may know better as TJ Perkins. The Christopher Street Connection went to a no contest with the Ring Crew Express. CM Punk defeated Mace of the Ring Crew Express. The Carnage Crew of Loke DeVito and Just Incredible went to a no contest with Izzy, Dixie, and Angel Dust. A couple big notes coming out of this.
First of all, when you say CM Punk defeated Mace, you mean of the Christopher Street Connection?
Yeah. I said yeah. I screwed up. Thank you so much.
No problem.
A couple notes from Mike Johnson about the Carnage Crew match. He writes first, the Carnage Crew and Just Incredible went to a no contest with Special K when the Pennsylvania State Athletic Commission legitimately stopped the match when a bleeding Credible ended up bumping into the crowd. The commission has been adamant in the last year that no bleeding wrestlers go into the crowd for health reasons, but Credible was caught up in the moment and forgot. So that's the first note. And the second is, Deranged of Special K, who was scheduled for this match, is done with the company. He was booked for the convention show and didn't make it, so they've opted no longer to book him, as it was an issue in the past. At one point, Deranged was planned to break away from Special K and be part of Julius Smokes' faction, but he missed a show in Baltimore without contacting the promotion and hadn't been used since. They were going to bring him back in January, but opted to use him on this show, Final Battle 2003, which would have been his official return. It's a shame, as he has a lot of talent, but as of right now, the promotion felt their hands were tied. So, one of the things we've gotten going through these old shows is really appreciating like how good Deranged was, and it is kind of sad that it seems like he would and eventually would come back in Ring of Honor and work a bunch more dates.
He'll be back pretty soon, actually. Yeah,
but definitely, it sounds like they had a bigger push in mind for him that he never ended up getting.
Right.
So I imagine maybe made them more hesitant to ever be like, all right, we'll use you, but we're not going to, put you in a big stable or anything.
Right.
So that's kind of sad, but, whatever, life. And that's my new catchphrase, whatever, life. Next up, Hydro defeated 3 other people in a 4-way, Oman Tortuga, Slick Wagner Brown, and Nick Gage. Yes, Nick Gage, 15 years ago. That's a crazy combination. Nick Gage wrestled in Ring of Honor in 2003. Weird to think, but it's true.
Everyone's favorite now.
Yeah, everyone's favorite longtime felon. And then the semi-main event of the afternoon card was Trent Acid beat Sanjay Dutt. Thought this was an interesting comment again from Mike Johnson, who was there. Dutt is a great performer, but he hasn't really shined thus far in his Ring of Honor work. It's almost similar to Paul London last year, where he was tearing down the house in Ring of Honor, but when he worked in NWA TNA, he wasn't as impressive out of the gate. So I haven't watched enough TNA from that period to know if that's true, but he's kind of presenting Sanjay as like the reverse Paul London, where he was good in TNA and then not great in Ring of Honor. So
hey, it happens. I've definitely seen examples of that with other people.
Yeah, absolutely. There's wrestlers, and we'll probably get into them over time, like
Chris Sabin. At this point, at least.
Or even sometimes I thought like eventually he really clicked, but I thought like early when Claudio got brought into Ring of Honor, like I was watching stuff like Chikara at the time. I thought his Chikara work I was like, there's something he's missing in Ring of Honor at first that he had in places like Chikara.
Yeah, and later on, Christopher Daniels, I feel like, when he comes back to ROH after everything, his TNA work outshined his ROH work during that period.
Yeah, sometimes guys, just their role or the company or whatever, they're just, things don't click, and it doesn't mean they're not clicking somewhere else.
Right, exactly.
So, it's important to note sometimes when we talk about, this guy didn't look so good or whatever, it doesn't mean they were bad wrestlers. It doesn't even mean they weren't doing good stuff somewhere else at the same time even. And finally, the main event of the afternoon card were the Briscoe brothers, Jay and Mark Briscoe. They defeated the SAT to retain the Ring of Honor tag team titles. I was almost going to watch this match, but I didn't have time. This is said to have been not a good match. I've heard people tell me, like, are you rewatching this? This is not a good match. And it's notable, we'll talk about maybe a bit later, Mark Briscoe hurt his knee pretty bad, apparently, during this match. And ended up having to pull double duty. He still gutted through it. So the final, kind of sad in a weird way, even though I thought they were kind of underwhelming, that the SAT, for all their, they were a pretty big part of this period of indie wrestling, or at least 2001, 2002. And their final match is not even on like an actual DVD release that isn't Ring of Honor uncensored.
Yeah, that sucks for Mark Briscoe, by the way.
And now we can review the show proper. Final Battle 2003 took place December 27th, 2003 in Philadelphia at their debut show at the Philadelphia National Guard Armory in front of a reported Ring of Honor record-setting crowd of 1,500 people, although one source told The Observer that the actual paid attendance was closer to 1,000, but I guess more 1,500 in the building and some freebies. But The Observer wrote about the new venue. Ring of Honor basically forced to move out of the Murphy Rec Center because the capacity of 400 was going to be enforced strictly from this point forward, announced its next Philadelphia show on December 27th for the 3,000-seat Philadelphia National Guard Armory. ECW tried that building years ago and drew well the first time and poorly the second. The building can be curtained off in a way that would look full even with 500 people. They were unable to get the Viking Hall since 3PW had a date. They also were scheduled to talk with the Electric Factory as far as a permanent home. So, Matt, none of that. They ended up continuing to go back to the Philadelphia National Guard Armory, and 1,500 people, or even over 1,000 for a Ring of Honor at this time, was a very good crowd. This
is the first ROH show ever to take place in a building that I actually saw ROH in. Because I've gone to a lot of shows at that building, and I can tell you it's pretty big. It's pretty spacious, and it's a really good place to see a show. Sightlines are very good. They have like big bleachers with a lot of room to sit in, and it's a good venue. So it was a good change for ROH for sure. And the crowd on this particular night clearly was enjoying it because they were hot.
Yeah, I would say this might have been, in my opinion, the hottest Ring of Honor crowd we've seen yet. And
it's hard to say, but it's certainly the hottest in a long time.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that like the very previous show we reviewed, War of the Wire, that was probably like the worst crowd we've seen so far, and this is at least probably top 3.
Yeah, I mean, obviously part of it is it's many, many, many more people, but
and a bit of a different card, but
yes, but they were they were psyched for this event from the beginning.
In fact, let me see if I can find it in my notes. I don't know how he knew this. I think maybe I'll find it later, but I think Mike Johnson said there was like 130 people that came from like far away to see the show. Like he was doing the old reel off countries and license plates and stuff. But this obviously, just judging from this was their record setting crowd. This was an event to people. People really wanted to see the All Japan guys.
Yeah, I guess 2 of them in particular, but yes.
Yeah, no, they really wanted to see Arashi and Miyamoto, obviously.
I can't.
For a nice moment.
Yeah, I want to see more and more and more of Arashi after this show.
So, I could say this for later in the show, but I think it's kind of good to set the table. The big story of this show, in some ways, was how the All Japan wrestlers felt about doing this show and how that changed and what made that change. So I'll just start the story. I got a few sources, but I'll start with this is what the Ring of Honor website hyped this upcoming show as. The Japanese contingent is eagerly anticipating Final Battle 2003. We have gotten word that the Great Muta can't wait to return to the United States and is very much looking forward to performing in front of the Ring of Honor fans. Now, I'll juxtapose this with this is the Observer story after the show, and I'll also note this is the second time in Ring of Honor's history at this point that they had a show so big that Dave actually covered it as like a major story and not in the here and there section. The first time was the Teddy Hart incident. This was a show Dave actually gave like a big story to. So this is what the Observer wrote about this show. When Kaiji Muto and the All Japan crew came to the U.S. over the weekend, they considered it more of a vacation between tours. When Ring of Honor booker Gabe Sapolsky asked a couple of the company wrestlers who were working with the All Japan stars before the December 27th show in Philadelphia about how their matches looked to be going, since it was the company's biggest show in history, the reply was that the Japanese wrestlers didn't want to do much of anything. Muto, in fact, went to promoter Rob Feinstein before the show and asked him if he could work the opener so he could get out of the building early and enjoy his vacation. He assumed he'd be performing in front of 250 fans and working as a heel. Feinstein told him that the people were going to go nuts for him, and there was no possible way he could heal. Muto didn't believe it, even though fans cheered him in many of his later WCW matches on brief comebacks, and really wanted to cheer him in 1989 as well. When he was a U.S. regular in the late 80s, the general rule among bookers seemed to be that American fans would never cheer a Japanese wrestler. Great Muto was an American heel character based on the success of the Great Kabuki character in Texas years earlier. But when the All Japan wrestlers saw the reaction they were getting from a crowd announced as a company record 1,500, they put on their working shoes and tore the house down. When all was over, All Japan was still said to be thrilled with the reaction they got. While there are no plans, both sides talked about doing another show, supposed to be like the idea of doing it as an annual big show at the end of the year. They also talked about perhaps All Japan promoting a Ring of Honor show at Korakuen Hall in Japan. Muto had never seen the product and didn't know what it was prior to the start of the show. He most likely figured it would be something like the next show he was on the next night in San Antonio, which drew about 200 fans. So,
I wonder what put a kibosh on the whole All Japan ROH relationship, because it didn't really last after this show.
yeah,
They moved to to Noah by late 2005 and Dragon Gate with a pretty strong relationship with those two promotions.
Yeah, and they had a brief dalliance even with New Japan between this and those companies. So they kind of hopped everywhere. But yeah, it's weird because I think I saw another story where it was like All Japan was so pumped by this Ring of Honor show, they were thinking about running the U.S. by themselves, which it seemed like a thing Japanese companies did. Because I think when we talked about 01 in 2002, after they had some of their guys work Ring of Honor, they were talking about, well, maybe we'll run a 01 show in America. And everyone... They would work with Ring of Honor and then get this crazy buzz where they feel like, well, maybe we could run here regularly. But it seems like a lot of them ended up getting cold feet.
That is what it seems like. But at least continuing to put your guys on ROH shows. But I don't know. It's until the Noah and Dragon Gate thing, nothing really ever stuck.
And I consider the show to be the first major time Ring of Honor ever worked with a Japanese promotion. They did work with 01 for All-Star Extravaganza, where they had Otani and Tanaka. But this was the first time really where they got a big batch of guys. And it really was the sole big focal point of a big show. And obviously Ring of Honor would get great success with that and would use that formula quite often in the future. We have some other sources on this story, though, which I think also give some background to it. I found an old Ring of Honor straight shoot interview with Samoa Joe, and he tells a pretty, I think, fun story about what it was like backstage at the show. He says before the show, Joe says he ran to Miyamoto and Hanma and says they were pretty adamant about the show just being a vacation for them. Joe says he and a lot of the other Ring of Honor guys like CM Punk and AJ Styles were all pissed that the All Japan guys felt that way. Joe goes on to say they weren't asking the All Japan guys to kill themselves, but he felt like they should at least put on an effort. And then Joe says the All Japan guys thought that the Ring of Honor show would be a small indie event, maybe drawing 200 people, and that hopefully the crowd would be blacked out and that the Samurai TV crew that was there recording the show for Japan would shoot all upshots, which Joe says is a common Samurai TV trick when they shoot Japanese stars at small U.S. shows. Joe then says, before the show started, Muto walked to the curtain as the show started, and he looked through the curtain at the crowd. And Joe says at this point, using his rough knowledge of conversational Japanese, he saw Great Muta tell an assistant of his to, quote, run to the bus and get the good gear, unquote. Joe thinks at that point Muta told the other All Japan wrestlers that they were going to put in an effort that night. And Joe thinks the reception from the crowd made the All Japan talent really want to put in an effort, especially guys like Hanma and Miyamoto. So it's pretty amazing that their minds were changed that much. And I love the idea that Muta has good gear.
Do you believe that story? Do you think it's more this is almost like an intentional urban legend that they're creating, where they were just so amazed with what they saw in ROH that they decided that they were going to work hard and get the good gear? Because I don't know. It seems like that's a quick turnaround. Also, if he was that sure about what America would be, why'd he even bring the good gear?
I think we just talked about a couple sources said they thought they were going to see a 200-person show. I think they probably had in the back of their mind we should probably bring gear just in case. But I believe that they thought it was going to be a small show and they wouldn't have to work hard. I don't think that in their minds they were going to go like, no matter what, we weren't going to work hard. I think probably they were like, well, a bigger show, we have to step it up. But at the same time, the Ring of Honor thing made it sound like, oh, they really are pumped. That Ring of Honor news story from their website made it sound, oh, they're really pumped to come here and work there. I bet you they weren't. And quite honestly, I also don't think like the narrative and the Observer and stuff from the reports they were getting were like, oh, they really worked hard and tore the house down. I don't think they like completely mailed it in, but I think in some of these matches we're going to cover, they still weren't like tearing the house down effort.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'll save that for the actual matches, but yeah, I think there's a lot of questions to be asked about that particular concept.
And I also want to know, like, that the one thing I kind of agree with you, like, I don't really doubt the stories, but one thing that gets me a little more going to your skepticism is that part where the Muta said to Rob Feinstein, like, can I go on first because I want to start my vacation? He had to work the next night. So, like, what's Muta in a rush to do in Philadelphia on a Saturday night? He's like, oh, I want to catch a movie, Rob. Like,
yeah,
why would he?
In December, yeah.
He's like, I really want to try the Wawa, Rob. Like, I gotta do it now before it closes. You gotta help me.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't think Wawa closes, but
yeah, Wawa is something I've never been to, so I'm just a Wawa poser. I know it's a Philly thing, and they have hoagies.
Yeah, it's not just Philly, but yes, it is popular in that part of the country.
So one other thing I guess we should mention too. I thought this was just interesting tidbit. The All Japan guys did go on to a San Antonio show the next night, and it was more of apparently what they thought. So check this out, Matt. This is from the Observer. The San Antonio show, promoted by Brandon Oliver's River City Wrestling, was a back to reality for All Japan the next night with a small crowd. It was announced that Road Warrior Animal had the flu. Animal had called the night before saying that was the reason he wouldn't be coming. So Muto and Arashi retained their tag titles over Pete Lothario, Jose Sun, and Hot Stuff Hernandez. Miyamoto lost to Jeremy Sage, while Kojima worked as Great Koji and beat Black Gordman Jr. Gordman Jr. was busted up when he cracked his head on the guardrail doing a tope. So, interesting that Kojima's opponents on both nights like get bad head injuries. That's a weird thing. And what a weird match. Muta and Arashi versus Jose Lothario's son and Hot Stuff Hernandez.
Hey.
In front of 200 people.
Maybe they tore the house down when they saw how cool those 200 people were. Muto looked through the curtain and be like, this crowd is full of cool babes.
Get the mediocre gear.
Yeah.
Get the middle of the road gear.
Also, apparently the flu must have been really going around because another wrestler on this show supposedly had the flu as well.
Yeah, well, yeah, Johnny Cashmere, right?
Well, also B.J. Whitmer, they said.
Oh, yeah. Johnny Cashmere missed this show, actually, I should mention, because of the flu, although I think this might have been the incident where later on he was working at his job at a bar that night, and Gabe got into a fight with him over that, I think, and like saying, oh, you can work at a bar, but you can't wrestle, and big to-do. But I had some notes here about there was a couple big glowing pieces from both Dave Meltzer and Mike Johnson talking about how successful Ring of Honor was at this time. I'm going to just edit them because they're long, and I think the show's going to be plenty long as it is. But I'll just note, this was one of the first times I saw real big stories about, like, Ring of Honor is really on the way up. They're doing really good. They're really doing well financially. And obviously, we'll get to it in a few shows, they weren't doing good financially. Like, they were growing certainly in popularity and crowd sizes, but in a few shows, we'll get reports from these same sources saying that, oh, Rob Feinstein and Kerry Silken have lost hundreds of thousands of dollars with Ring of Honor already. So, a bit of a difference there. And finally, before we get to the show proper, a few other interesting notes from Mike Johnson, who again was there live. He says All Japan was happy with the show. Already discussions to return for a joint show, blah, 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 Corrigan and Hall. And let me just go here. Dave Meltzer said that the company's looking at doing a second U.S. tour in July. So, again, that never happened as far as I know. Mike Johnson says Alexis Laurie, who was under a WWE developmental deal, was backstage at Final Battle 2003, just hanging out. They say that Ring of Honor's website did record hits the day after the show, and that they have tons of photos already up, blah, blah, blah. The promotion upgraded their lighting and sound system with the show using a computerized system and lighting effects. Matt, did you notice anything different when it came to that?
Nope. Did you?
Me neither. And with a crowd of 1,500, the promotion has now drawn a bigger paid attendance than NWA TNA has in their own short history. So it's funny because obviously TNA would become much bigger in their time, but at this point, Ring of Honor actually drew a bigger crowd. So we go to the show proper. The show starts with Gary Michael Capetta backstage asking the cameraman, Gabe Sapolsky, we can tell by his voice, who they have for intermission interviews. Gabe says they have the Briscoes, and then Gary manages to shoe in a plug for his book Body Slams. When the Carnage Crew barge in, screaming angrily and wanting to know where Special K are, DeVito says this feud with Special K has gotten personal. Gary wants to know how, and the crew just tells Gary to find Special K, and then he'll find out. So Matt, this feud's going to a whole new level, and we'll have more to talk about that later.
Yeah. I mean, they build this one slowly, but it's an interesting storyline.
And next, we have the debut of a new segment. Samoa Joe's in the ring before the show starts, and the fans aren't in the building yet. And he says this is the debut of a new segment, Samoa Joe's Ring, where he'll demonstrate some of his favorite moves. Oman Tortuga interrupts him and introduces himself as Joe's first guest. Oman thinks Joe's going to ask him a lot of questions, and then Joe informs him he's here to demonstrate moves. Oman has the great line where he goes, "Wait, you want to do things? To me?" And within seconds, Joe has taken Tortuga down and is demonstrating a tight choke. Joe says that's what Mark Briscoe has in store tonight. Joe goes to demonstrate another move to Tortuga, who runs out of the ring in fear and gets the hell out of there. We'd see a few more of these segments over the shows. I never became a huge thing, but little segment for Joe. And then we're moving on finally to the first match of the show. Bryan Danielson defeated Jay Briscoe by submission in 13 minutes, 36 seconds with the cattle mutilation. Not very often. It's been quite a while, I think, since we've seen Bryan Danielson in the opener of a show. Matt, what do you think? This is a pretty big opener to have for a card.
Yeah, I mean, it was great. Like, this was a really great opener. It was like the first 2/3 of a super match. They clearly intentionally held back a little bit. And I know Meltzer said like this was supposed to showcase a new style. I don't know if I really felt that it showcased a new style. It was just a really solidly worked mat wrestling match with like they did a really long headlock spot, right? And they did like slaps, and Danielson debuted his airplane spin, which become a big part of his repertoire soon. It wasn't a long airplane spin, but it was good. But, not a lot of high impact moves and like a very quick tap out after Dragon went for the cattle mutilation. But the crowd was going crazy for it. And I also enjoyed a few things in the commentary. Like when Gabe said that this lineup was so good that we had to divide it into two parts or two halves. And I'm like, wait, what? You always divide the show into two halves. Like
this pie is so good we have to cut into slices.
He literally said because he was trying to say there was an All Japan half and just a regular ROH half. But like, is that because of the goodness of the lineup, or is it because of the amount of matches and the categorizing of those? Anyway, I'm being pedantic. But another thing to be pedantic about: the top 5 rankings. Homicide number 5, Matt Stryker number 4, BJ Whitmer number 3, CM Punk number 2, and Mark Briscoe, at number 1. And my question was, why is Homicide on this and not Steve Corino? Since Homicide lost the War of the Wire match. But that's neither here nor there. I thought this was a very good opener. Stiff, not overdoing it. Like I said, it felt like the first 15 minutes of a 25-minute match of the year style match. That's sort of how I feel about it.
I thought this was a very good match. One of the better openers Ring of Honor's probably had up to this point. I felt like this is a good match, like side by side with the Bryan Danielson Christopher Daniel match from Round Robin Challenge way back in the second show Ring of Honor ever did, where I think if I was doing like classes on wrestling and trying to show guys good examples of how to do a good opener that like the crowd loves and is satisfying, but doesn't give away everything. I think both these matches are like perfect examples of that, where, like you said, you don't feel like this is the best match they could have had. Like you said, they this felt like the first 2/3. You feel like they leave some stuff on like off the table for a bigger match down the road, which sadly I don't think these two ever had. But you don't feel deprived. It feels like a complete match to me. It did, or at least like a very satisfying match. But they didn't go near fall crazy. They didn't do, apart from a flying headbutt, there's no dives. They only do a few of their biggest moves like right at the very end. There's good restraint to this match, yet it's entertaining the whole way through. I think part of that's just there's good intensity. And there's struggle. What I like about this is like so much of this match is simple stuff, like you said, Danielson fighting to get out of headlocks and stuff. But what I like is every move they're so in the moment, and everything feels like a struggle, and like they give a shit. It's not them just mentally thinking 4 moves down the road. Everything is them in the moment, really selling stuff. And I also even felt like Danielson always brings good intensity, but I felt like this was the perfect amount. Like it was good intensity, but it wasn't over the top, because these two really don't have a feud or anything. I mean, they're going to have a tag match on the next show, but like it's intense, but it's not so intense for two guys that have no real reason to hate each other.
Right. It was competitiveness, not hatred.
Exactly. And I thought there was a great moment in that I really liked where there's a sequence where they're trading slaps, and then Danielson spits in Jay's face, and then Jay responds, he fakes that he's going to throw another slap, and then when Danielson flinches, he just rakes an eye, and it gets a huge crowd ovation. And I think that sums up this match, where like they were doing simple stuff like slaps and eye rakes, and the crowd was just loving it. And that was the first time I was like, man, this is a really good crowd. You know, they're really into something there. It's not really doing like super over the top levels of action. And like you said, first airplane spin he ever broke out in Ring of Honor. During commentary, Gabe mentions that there will be a pure wrestling title, and I believe this is the first time in Ring of Honor on the DVDs, at least, that he's ever mentioned that there's going to be a pure wrestling title. So a little historical note there. But yeah, I thought this was a very good match, and don't go in expecting like it's going to be them trying to do a 20-minute main event, but just really satisfying, fun match to me, and yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, it's just a perfect like opener style match.
Yeah, and like you said, this card was split into 2 halves: the Ring of Honor half and the All Japan half,
because it was so good.
But also, we'll get into it a little bit later. There was one guy that maybe didn't want it to be split like that, and we'll get into that in a couple matches, maybe. But next up, we after the match, we fade into Jay Briscoe walking backstage, and Trent Acid finds him and sarcastically congratulates him on his match tonight. Trent says he wants a shot at his tag team titles. Jay says the Briscoes do whatever Jim Cornette tells them to do, which I felt is a little kind of cuts his balls off a little bit. I know they're trying to sell the Jim Cornette partnership, but this idea, they almost just saying we do whatever Jim tells us to do, that's a bit, come on.
Yeah, and also, like, if you're going to deliver like something like that, you want to have it be delivered in like a good promo that explains it, instead of just kind of like meekly saying, we'll do whatever he says, bye, like that, which is basically what all the whole thing was. Because the Briscoes, as we have established and we'll see later, they are not good promos at all yet.
Yeah, it's crazy how good they were as wrestlers right off the bat, but yet how much they had to learn over time, the promos. Like, it's weird how they're so fully formed in one way and so, like, not fully formed in the other aspect of wrestling.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they'd be offended by me saying because they're really good now, but they were really bad promos then. Like, really bad.
So, next up, we have the Fight Without Honor, so a no-rules match. John Walters defeated Xavier via pinfall in 18 minutes, 25 seconds, after he hit a flipping powerbomb off one ladder through another in a spot that, I'll talk about in a second, went pretty wrong. I can see this match being very divisive. I can see some people thinking this was a fantastic match, and I can see some people thinking it's a horrible match. I think it depends what you want. I refer to it as a big dumb stunt show. If you like that kind of match, you will really like this match. for me, I kind of compare it to the last two Homicide Carino matches, where those matches were full of like weapons and stuff, but it felt still like the focus, especially at least in the Better Friends Stiffer Enemies match, was still on like Carino and Homicide and not the weapons. This is a match that feels like it's nothing. It's built around just crazy weapon spots. Like the whole match for 18 minutes is basically they wrestle for a minute, one of them loses an exchange and sells while the other guy grabs a weapon and sets it up, and then they do a weapon spot and then just repeat that over and over again for 18 minutes. But some of the spots are really fucking crazy and entertaining. Like Xavier does a springboard 450 onto John Walters, who's on a ladder that's suspended like between the ring and the guardrail. Xavier takes an Alabama slam on a ladder and warps it badly. Xavier does a 450 off the top rope to the floor through a table and like hits him really hard on it. There's a back cracker off the ladder, like just crazy stuff. And I enjoyed this match while still very clearly seeing the flaws. Like you can see it felt very much like an exhibition where guys have to lay too long to sell a thing. And especially there was the thing where there's two ladders in this match, and very early on, I think on the Alabama Slam, the first ladder gets warped, and a lot of this match is spent with them desperately trying to get this ladder to like not completely fall apart and stay in position for things, and it really broke like my suspension of disbelief, because I was like, you have so many other weapons, including a larger ladder. Like, why are you working so much time babying this one ladder? But it's because they had plans for spots, including the big spot at the end, that required both ladders, and they couldn't just like throw away the one ladder. But it just created some really weird moments. Like there's a moment in this match where they're setting up the bent warped ladder to do the springboard 450 onto Walters on the ladder spot. And Xavier at first does not feel comfortable with the ladder. He's trying to set it up, and he's like, oh, this is too warped. So he goes back, grabs the table from the other ring, pulls it out, and then goes back and is like, no, I'm not going to use the table. And then he just flips the ladder over so that like the warped end is sticking up, and then does the spot. But stuff like that where they just spent so much time. Like at one point, I think one of them even seemed like they were getting angry at the ladder, which I thought was funny. Like, God damn this stupid thing. But yeah, we can go into the end spot in a bit. But first off, Matt, I just want to know what you thought of the match.
Yeah, I have no qualms in saying I thought this was the match of the night.
Wow.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I said it was a great like indie spot fest brawl. Like that's what it was. It wasn't like an old school like intensity, like every nuance counts brawl, but it was definitely more than just a bunch of random spots. Like there was a lot of intensity here. I thought John Walters was really playing like the babyface who was just like out for revenge. I thought Xavier was awesome, honestly. Like I thought he was really good at projecting his character, like really great as a heel. His offense had a lot of pop to it. They were doing all kinds of just cool stuff. And yes, there was some awkwardness, but I actually, it's hard. When I say this stuff, it's obviously under the guise of back in the early 2000s, wrestlers did stuff that was way too dangerous, and they shouldn't do it, and they don't do it as much anymore, and I'm glad for that. But, I've sort of, while doing this show, I've sort of accepted that that's a change in the wrestling business, and that's just how it was back then. So having accepted that, I thought that the use of the broken ladder was kind of cool because they were actually able to pull it off somehow. And then they finally do pull out another ladder, but just the springboard, like Arabian press through the floor, through the ladder on the floor, like the crowd went insane for it. I thought it was super well done. Like you said, the Alabama slam onto the ladder, which with the ladder bent, that was just so crazy. Right, the final spot was a disaster, definitely, like a total disaster, but it was kind of like it was so disastrously car wreck-ish that it was dramatic in its own right.
It was scary to me.
It was scary, but
like the way Xavier lands. I guess we should explain it quickly.
Yeah. So So there were two ladders, right?
Yeah.
And so one ladder was propped up in the corner, like, over the middle rope. And the other ladder was set up, and the guys were basically climbing on top of the ladder. Both guys were on top of the ladder. And John Walters was attempting to do a sunset flip powerbomb off the ladder through the other ladder that was set up in the corner, but the ladder was too close. So Walters basically landed leg first and knocked into the ladder that was in the corner, and Xavier's head just bounced off the turnbuckle. And yes, you're right, it was scary, but more than 15 years later, I knew that they were not injured, so that wasn't the thing that overwhelmed my mind, if that makes sense.
Gabe even screamed something like "What a disaster" or something after the spot.
Yeah, it was a disastrous spot, but it's not like Xavier didn't look like he had a devastating move done to him.
It was exciting. Here's my problem with that spot. I'll just say is. When Xavier sets up the ladder in the corner, it's so close to the corner that you wonder what's he doing, and you're thinking, okay, well maybe Xavier is going to jump off this big ladder that he set up onto Walters, who's more in the middle of the ring. But then you go, well, why did he just spend all this time setting up this other ladder in the middle first? And then you see he grabs John Walters, who's lying prone on the mat, he's out, and he just lifts him up and leans him against the ladder, basically to tell him hey, start climbing the ladder. And so then Xavier goes and climbs the other side as Walter climbs his side. And then he goes to superplex John Walters, and the ladder is so close that he would not have, if Xavier had actually pulled it off, Xavier wouldn't have superplexed John Walters onto the ladder in the turnbuckle. He basically would have superplexed him onto the ring post or outside the ring. And it's one of those spots where it is so convoluted because he's doing all these things that don't make sense only to set up for the reversal. The only move that makes sense is the move they ended up doing, which is John Walters reversing all of that into the sunset flip powerbomb on the ladder. So that's the part more other than it doesn't bug me as much that the spot blew up, because like you said, it ended up still looking like Xavier took a devastating move. It's more just the amount of setup Xavier did for something that didn't make sense just so he could get countered. It kind of strained believability, I thought.
Everything you're saying is true, but this was just a big dumb match, it was done with so much intensity and fire, and it was fast paced. It wasn't when the Sandman and Sabu did their tables and ladders match at November to Remember, where there was just a lot of setting up and missing and stuff. This wasn't like that. There was a lot of movement in this match, and a lot of spots connected really well. And they've been trying for so long to get this feud over as a top feud, and over the past few shows, it kind of started to click, and the crowd was very into this. And when the match ended, John Walters and Xavier felt like stars, even though it was sort of like a smoke and mirrors. It didn't really stick, but it did feel like it on this night. The other thing I enjoyed was the stuff with Prince Nana. So Prince Nana came out inexplicably in Xavier's corner, and he explains it after the match. But Gabe is still doing what's Prince Nana doing here? Isn't Xavier in the prophecy? And CM Punk is obviously he's not in the prophecy. I mean, listen, this is really obvious. And then Gabe says it again. I guess Xavier must not be in the prophecy. Nana pulled the referee out to save him. And Punk is just do you ever listen to me? He's do you ever listen to anything I say? And I really enjoyed that, because it was just he was saying what we were all thinking, and we were saying basically for the past 3 months of shows, which is just, why would they think he was in the prophecy at this point? And why wouldn't they just ask him?
Punk saying that to Gabe felt like the payoff of an angle that you and I created ourselves, just this, us talking about every time, and finally to hear someone just tell Gabe what are you talking about? Obviously, he's not. I was just oh, this is like the WrestleMania moment. They're wrapping up a big angle here.
That's right.
I'm telling Gabe that he's he's crazy. And it was funny because Punk, I feel in real life and in character, he had this kind of special thing where he was one of the only wrestlers that had the cachet to mock Gabe and openly be you're an idiot. And sometimes this it worked out. It was really entertaining. But one thing I want to say about this match is I'm probably making it sound like I didn't like it. I actually thought this was a good match. I really had fun, and I think maybe the best compliment I could pay is it was an 18-minute John Walters Xavier match, and I was never bored, not for a minute. It was entertaining the whole way through. But I guess what I am saying is it's a match that was really entertaining to me because I thought those big spots we described, especially like that Arabian press, is one of the craziest spots in Ring of Honor up to this point, and maybe in its history.
And you could say that spot connects very well.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and I agree with you. Xavier looked really good. His execution on a lot of stuff, and I guess what I'm just saying is it's a match where there are obvious like flaws to it, and either you're going to be so like bowled over by the cool stuff that you're not going to care, or you're going to be the kind of person that the flaws are all you're going to be able to see. So while I enjoy this match and you enjoy this match, I think it's going to be one of those matches where if people watch it based on recommendations, some of them will say that was like one of the best matches in months, and some will say, I hated that match. This is everything I hate about wrestling.
I think, okay, fair. Okay, so here's a controversial statement I'm going to make. Definitely the match is not for everyone, but I think it will probably be more widely well received than the War of the Wire match, which I thought was obviously a better match, but that match was so like dark and brutal that I think that's really not for everyone. Whereas this one has like very crazy entertaining spots that I think will be enjoyed by a wider range of people. How about that?
Yeah, I think this has higher highs, I would say. Like, those big spots are just way more like you were saying, it's less brutal and more just like crazy. Like big crowd-pleasing spots. The other thing I thought, I guess we should also mention, is Xavier bleeds real bad in this match. I think I read some live reports saying that they could see at different points like blood squirting out of his head. Oy. And I didn't see that. Like, I saw he was bleeding fairly bad. I didn't ever see a moment where it was coming out, but I trust the live reports. But one thing I want to go back to that you said, which was that Xavier looked really good here. Isn't it like sadly ironic that basically like Xavier works a few more shows and then I think he suffers an injury and then doesn't come back to Ring of Honor except for a one-time. Well, I think he has a couple of appearances over the years, but really we're nearing the end of his spot as a regular. Isn't it kind of sad that this is like one of the one of the best performances he's had?
Yeah, I'd say
they've already given up on him.
Yeah, I'd say one of the two best Xavier matches in ROH was this match.
This and the Paul London matches for me are like
yes,
far and away his best performances.
But I think all in all, and we're not going to do the award this year, but biggest surprise, right? But Xavier in the second half of 2003 being one of the highlights of a lot of the shows that he's on is one of the biggest surprises for me of the year.
It's crazy that like he probably got pushed too soon and in the wrong way, but it's like like you just said, in the second half of 2003, he's better than I think a lot of the other mid-card names that Gabe is pushing now. But again, it feels like he's already given up on Xavier. And
the crowd already sees him in a certain way, unfortunately. I've said this before, but like he really did seem like he sucked when he was the babyface in ROH in the first half of 2002. So that, I think really hurt him a lot overall.
And even in this match, obviously the whole point of this match is to put over John Walters and elevate him to a new level. And, I mean, John Walters, I'm not going to say he didn't get over in this match. The crowd's chanting his name afterwards. But I felt like Xavier was clearly, of these two guys, the guy who was more impressive. Like, if you had to ask me just after watching this match, who's the guy to push as a star after it, I would have said Xavier.
Yes, absolutely. He really made a great showing of himself. Yeah, he made a great showing of himself.
So, other notes, let me just say, we already talked about the great Punk Gabe commentary. Oh yeah, the Prince Nana thing. The Prince Nana thing I thought was a bit weird too, where Prince Nana comes to ringside early in the match. He even interferes at one point on Xavier's behalf. The ref ends up shoving Prince Nana down. And the thing that kind of bothered me was, we'll get to, I guess right now's the time for it. After the match, Prince Nana gets in the ring to help Xavier, and Walters grabs the mic. He gets a John Walters chant. Walters says he has spent months trying to earn Xavier's respect, and he feels like he did tonight. He wants a handshake, but then Prince Nana grabs the mic away from Walters. Nana announces that the prophecy is done, and a new group called the Embassy is beginning. And he tells Xavier to shake John Walters' hand. Xavier gets on the mic first, and he calls Walters one tough son of a bitch. He says shaking Walters' hand signifies both that he's out of the prophecy and that Walters did, in fact, earn his respect. They shake. That gets a good crowd reaction. And, Matt, my one problem with this is Gabe tries to do this sometimes, and I actually generally like it, where he tries to stack like a lot of big angles on his major shows to make the show seem even bigger and the angles seem bigger. And so obviously, I think that's why he picked Nana to start the embassy on this show and to have the announcement that Xavier's joining it. But I felt like they should have saved it for the next show because, one, the embassy is a heel group. And Nana's kind of being a face here after interfering in the match. He's basically like, yeah, you should shake his hand, and he did earn your respect. And then on top of that, I feel like if you put Nana on this whole Nana angle on the very next show, that would help rehab Xavier after his big feud loss here. But instead, it's like Nana comes out to support Xavier, and in his very first match with him as like his steward or whatever, Xavier loses. It's kind of like, I just feel like they could have saved the whole Nana stuff for the next show.
Yeah, well, as far as the whole face-heel thing, I mean, as we've discussed, this is a major issue that ROH has right now in general, which is, like, guys just are not that clear-cut in terms of whether they're good guys or bad guys. Like, guys are real serious heels on one show, they're almost face-like on another show. So I feel like that's very consistent with what ROH is doing right now. And I think that actually will continue through the night even, as far as the whole face-heel dynamics go.
Yeah. It's just another really bad example of Xavier's the heel in this feud. Nana behaves like a heel manager in this feud, but then Nana and Xavier both do the very face-like, you've earned our respect handshake thing. But then starting the next show, the embassy's a heel group. So, yeah, great example of just how inconsistent it is. And now we're going to a kind of an infamous match in Ring of Honor history, the Field of Honor Tournament Final match. Matt Striker defeated BJ Whitmer via submission in 18 minutes, 8 seconds when he made him submit to the Striker Lock. I'll note here, 18 minutes and 8 seconds is what we saw on the DVD. In my research, I found that originally this match went 28 minutes, 4 seconds. So they cut 10 minutes out of the match.
Or the live report was wrong, one or the other.
I saw numerous live reports of people saying this match was a half an hour, so I'm going to believe it. And I did see one minor cut that didn't seem like they cut out much time, and also one other reason I think that these reports are true is multiple reports said that Matt Striker spent a lot of the early match stalling on the outside like a heel, and I didn't really see much of that at all in what we watched. So I'm going to assume that was largely what was cut. But, Matt, this match gets people really look at this match as just a piece of not good things. What did you think about this match?
If it was really as bad as they say it was, and I haven't watched it in years, so I sort of had that memory too. But if it was really as bad as people say it was, they, again, did a really great job of editing it. Because it wasn't bad at all to me. It was a decent match. It didn't feel to me like it was the culmination of a big time months long thing. And like as I was watching the beginning of this, I was just like, man, remember all of the mysterious hype for the Field of Honor at first? Like, who's in it? What is it? Colt Cabana's trying to find Rob Feinstein. Remember, they would have like the Field of Honor is coming. Like
what is the Field of Honor? Like we're dying to know.
Like Gabbo. Like, and then it just ends up being Matt Striker versus BJ Whitmer in a match that was mostly on the mat. But all things considered, it was fine. Like, they said at the beginning that BJ Whitmer had 100-degree fever because he had the flu. If that's true, that's probably not a good thing for him to be doing because, I mean, I don't know if you've ever had the flu, but, you don't really want to be doing a bunch of, like, arm drags. Have you ever tried taking an arm drag with the flu, Trevor?
No, but Matt, I have in fact had the flu in my 34 years on Earth. Believe it or not, I have suffered the flu a couple times, and I can agree it's not good.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, he did his promo later. He didn't seem sick. Like usually when you have the flu, you can kind of tell that someone is sick. He didn't seem particularly sick, during this match or later. So hey, what a trooper he is. But as far as like matches and stuff, there was some fun commentary stuff like. Gabe like calling Whitmer a horse like in front of Punk and really like giggling about it. Like he's like, haha, look this Punk's gonna love it when I say this. And then Stryker puts a horse collar on Whitmer and Punk's like, how appropriate. But Punk, instead of just teasing Whitmer this time, he teases Matt Stryker's looks because I guess Stryker kind of has long, stringy hair and a beard now. So Punk says that Stryker looks like he's been living under somebody's car.
I laughed out loud when I heard it. Like, I wrote in my notes, like, there was some bad Punk stuff where I felt like sometimes Punk feels like he's trying to do a bad Jesse Ventura impression. And, like, there was stuff where he said, "Oh, I think B.J. Whitmer gets his temperature taken anally," and he was like saying that he's acting like a retard. But
right.
Then he also said that B.J. Whitmer rides the yellow bus, and I think it's a short bus.
Yes.
Says, what's wrong with you riding a yellow bus? Aren't most buses yellow? But anyway, I was just going to sum up with, I thought like some of those things were like the worst of Punk on commentary, but then when he said that Matt Stryker looks like he's been living under somebody's car, yeah. I thought like this is the best of Punk on commentary.
Yes. I don't know if this is just a regional expression, but kids always used to call the yellow school bus the cheese bus back when I was a kid. But I think that's a regional expression.
I think.
But yes, basically, if Punk's saying he looks like he rides the yellow bus, it basically just means that he's still in school, which, good for him.
Take night classes.
But yeah, so after Punk says that, Gabe's like, this isn't a beauty contest, and Punk is like, you could say that again. Yeah, Punk really does try to do the Jesse Ventura thing where he's like offensive and kind of racist sometimes, and like I'm sure he's grown out of it, but like later on during the Homicide match, he makes a comment about like how Homicide like did something because he's Puerto Rican or something, like stuff like that. But as far as the match itself, like Whitmer is working on Stryker's leg and actually pulls off his leg brace, which I think is kind of a cool spot. But also then Stryker goes after Whitmer's knee. He puts he slams it into the timekeeper's table, and he's in control for a really long time. And Whitmer finally gets a big move with almost like a Golden Gate swing, which is Donovan Morgan's move of all things, to get back momentum. And the crowd is, they seem mostly into it to me. Like, they're not on fire, certainly, but they're not dead. They're not booing anything like that. And I don't think ROH, edited the crowd noise.
No.
I don't think they were doing that at this point. So Whitmer went for the wrist clutch. Stryker blocked it, went after Whitmer's knee, and then he's chopping with his left, and the crowd pops big for the Stryker lock. And Whitmer is screaming, and he finally taps, and there was a big pop for Stryker's victory. So it was too long, even in the edited version, but it was solid, I thought. Like I said, didn't feel like the culmination of anything. So in that sense, it was a disappointment. But, maybe it's just because my expectations were so low, but I thought this was plenty fine and plenty entertaining.
Before I go into my thoughts on the match, I'm going to ask you a question. This is what I kind of wrote down about my thoughts on the crowd. It felt like to me that, I want to know if you agree with this or not, it was like 15% of the crowd hated this match, and unfairly hated it in the sense of there was a couple people catcalling and doing boring 2 minutes into the match, which I felt like no matter how the match turned out, that's way too soon to start judging a match. Although maybe they edited something out and I missed it. Again, they edited 10 minutes out, it sounds like. But I felt like if there was 15% of the crowd that hated this match, there was 20 to 25% of the crowd that was really trying to be supportive and trying to start chants and like the match, and then the rest of the crowd was more quiet. It wasn't like the entire crowd hated this match.
This wasn't that. None of that was apparent to me, honestly. It just seemed like they were mildly into the match. That's how I took it. They weren't shitting on it, they weren't loving it, but they were cheering it. They liked the Stryker lock. They popped for the ending. That's how I saw it. And there have been plenty of matches in time that we've been watching that the crowd has been dead for, that the crowd has shat on, and I don't think it was either of those things for this one.
I felt like the crowd, it was quieter overall, but there were still people making noise. There's some reports sent to the Observer at the time that said that there were people walking to the bathroom during this match. I don't know if people were doing that.
There are people that walk to the bathroom during literally any wrestling match, so that info alone is not is not that damning.
People deciding to use this as a bathroom break, maybe more than usual.
I guarantee you that during Hulk Hogan versus Andre the Giant, somebody in that 93,000 people went to the bathroom.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure someone ate like a bad hamburger and they probably rue the day. Like, I missed the goddamn main event, but
Missed the body slam.
um, actually, I'll just read before I get into my thoughts. There's a little observer note where Dave writes, "The only thing on the show that didn't work was the Field of Honor tournament finals, which was which from the promotion going forward was actually going in considered the most important booking of the show. Matt Striker beat BJ Whitmer in 28 minutes 4 seconds of a match described as boring, which died bad live. The match was supposed to be a setup for the Pure Wrestling title, which will be a focal point of the company next year. People started to walk out on the match and go to the bathroom." So that's what Dave's what the reports he got sent to him. Again, I don't think if you watch what they left in the match, I don't think the crowd's that negative on it. But again,
Would you agree that they pop for the finish?
I did. Well, this is one thing I'll say. I think like some people were genuinely happy to see Stryker win, but I also think part of it was there's a point in this match, and I can pinpoint it out. The second time Matt Striker puts BJ Whitmer in the horse collar, when he goes out, when like Whitmer gets out of it, the crowd boos, and from that point in the match, every time there's like a serious submission or pin attempt, the crowd cheers loudly, and then they boo when the match doesn't end. So I think some people were genuinely just happy anytime the match was going to end and got mad when it didn't. But I also think some people also really did want to see Matt Striker win. I think it was probably a bit of both. I think some people were probably just making noise because it's like, yay, the match could end here, and then boo, it didn't end.
Interesting.
But in my opinion on this match is, I think technically it's a perfectly average match. Nothing they do is wrong. Like, Matt Striker even busts out a dive to the floor. And most of this match is, like, everything in this match is very sound psychology in the sense of Matt Striker goes after BJ Whitmer's knee. Like you said, he tears off his knee brace and goes after it. BJ Whitmer goes after Matt Striker's shoulder, which Gabe says Striker dislocated his shoulder on another indie show that weekend, I think, or a week ago, or sometime recently. In fact, right at the start of the match, as you mentioned, Gabe mentions that not only does BJ Whitmer have a 100-degree flu, he has a fever, he has bone chips in his elbow he needs surgery on, and Matt Striker has a dislocated shoulder. And I felt like it was Gabe trying to give excuses for the match. Punk at one point even says excuses to Gabe and kind of undercuts the point Gabe's trying to make. Like, he goes, I'm doing commentary with malaria. So, like, I thought that was another fun example of Punk kind of being a dick to Gabe. Gabe at one point says he estimates Whitmer's only at 60 to 75%. So they're trying to sell this as, like, it's a miracle they're even working the match. My problem with the match is this. One, like you said, it did not feel like the big finals to a tournament, and maybe that was just them being sick. It could be, but at the same time, they still decided to wrestle the match. Gabe claims on commentary they offered both guys the chance to reschedule this match for next month, and that they said no. So I have to judge what we're being given. My other problem with the match was it's a match built all around submission work, like two guys trading submissions, and it's hard to make a match like that work when Matt Striker only has one submission established, which is the Striker lock, and BJ Whitmer has no real, like, established submissions. And I felt one problem with this match, if you watch when people watch it, is they do some big submissions early, and then they'll go back to, like, really basic submissions. Like, one of the first submissions Striker does in this match is what they describe as a variation of the Striker lock, which is his finisher. And then, like, minutes later in the match, he'll be doing, like, just lightly grabbing Whitmer's knee and kind of twisting it a little bit or something. Like, there's not a progression. It's just them kind of doing some big submissions, then we'll do a minor submission. And I feel like this match could have been better if they built it from very low submissions up to the big ones, and they had more submissions established. There's nothing technically wrong with this match. It's just it feels like a mid-card match that went on for too long. And I guess the other thing is neither of these guys have the it factor. there's people that in wrestling that are really talented and they also have that special selling you can't quantify. And there's been wrestlers in history where they don't have talent, but they have that it. Like I would say Ultimate Warrior is one of those guys.
Sid.
Sandman, the Sid, yeah, have that it factor even if they didn't have a lot of talent. They have that, you can't take your eyes off of them. CM Punk during this match at one point says Matt Striker has everything a wrestler needs. He doesn't have the it factor. Neither of these guys have it. I think I've
also they're not like interesting characters or promos at this point. Let's be fair, but yes,
exactly. Like technically, they're very, very competent wrestlers. Like all their execution in this match is good, better than some other guys on the card. You know, they're very professional wrestlers, Matt. But neither of them must be fans of Stephen King because they don't have an ounce of it anywhere on them. That's the horrible joke I wrote for the show. But
they do a Salem's lot of chopping in this match.
Christine, but no, it's just they're like, and I think there's probably something we should mention too. Is this match was probably done a disservice of having to go on right after John Walters and Xavier doing every crazy thing ever, so that probably didn't help it either. But I also felt like that match was more intense than this match. And this match was, again, supposed to be this big end of tournament. Dave claims that he was told, like in those notes, that this was the most important match from a booking standpoint. You know, this was supposed to be the match that elevated Matt Striker to a new level. And it really, this is the end of Matt Striker. Like, he wrestles for another year in Ring of Honor, but he never really gets a push again.
No, he has a match. He has a match against Joe. Like that's almost like they felt like they have to give him the match because he won. But it's really like they're just burning it off because they're done with Matt Striker by then and everyone knows it. It's weird. I don't know. This must have been the match that maybe soured Gabe on him. That's the only thing I could think of. The idea that this is the most important match from a booking standpoint, I don't know what that means. Like Matt Striker had to win, but like what was the booking? Like it was like they have a match and Matt Striker wins. That was the booking of the match. Like there wasn't like there was some intricate thing they had to accomplish in this match. Like they put Matt Striker over. That could have happened in 5 minutes if they wanted to.
Yeah, I think it's more the importance of the booking. Like this, like the most important thing coming out of this match is that, or the show, is that Matt Striker is elevated to a new level, which clearly did not happen. And the other thing that's a bit weird is Matt Striker, the last show, BJ Whitmer does this dick move where it's a gauntlet match and Striker's on the outside and he doesn't let him get helped by doctors or refs. He pulls him in and beats him, and it's BJ Whitmer kind of showing a evil side, a mean streak. And then later on this show, he's going to turn heel. Yet in this match, Matt Striker's the one that kind of does the heelish. He really pulls at the knee brace, and he does the figure 4 leg lock on the ring post and won't let go when the ref's counting to 5.
I realized I did have that backwards in my recap. Yeah, Stryker pulled off Whitmer's knee brace, not the other way around.
Yeah, and Stryker apparently in the part that was edited out was stalling a lot like a heel. He's acting like a heel. He's supposed to be the babyface, and meanwhile B.J. Whitmer, who's supposed to be becoming this bad heel, is kind of sympathetic because he spends a lot of this match, as you said, like he's taking a lot of the offense in this match. He's getting put in a lot of submissions and valiantly fighting through them.
Right. It does feel like they forgot that angle that they just did at the beginning. Like it was like that angle never happened in the way they worked this match.
But I would say in a vacuum, I would agree. This match is an average undercard match that goes on too long. You know, but again, with the caveat that I'm only seeing 18 minutes of it, and if I saw 28, I might feel a lot differently. But I think with the mindset that this is the end of a tournament, you know, a tournament that hasn't had one really good match in it, and it's supposed to be a tournament that's elevating people to the top of the card and all this stuff, the intensity and the quality of the match both are a letdown. And it's an average match in a set at best, in a setting that you would expect at least something good. And I feel bad because maybe it's just them being hurt and sick. But
could be, although in the end, my main takeaway is like because my expectations were so low, it was probably a little better than I expected.
I mean, yeah. I mean, that's the other thing is if you watch, like, in a way, our review does a disservice to watching this match because if you come in it the way Matt and I did come into it, you'll probably be pleasantly surprised because it's not as bad as the legend. But if you come to it with us telling you, hey, it's not that bad, you'll probably be pleasantly surprised because it's not as bad as the legend. But if you come to it with us telling you, hey, it's not that bad, you'll probably be pleasantly surprised because it's not as bad as the legend. But if you come to it with us telling you, hey, it's not that bad, you'll probably be pleasantly surprised because it's not as bad as the legend. But if you come to it with us telling you, hey, it's not that bad, maybe you'll be like, well, it was kind of bad. I don't know. Maybe we're shifting the expectations in the wrong way. But yeah, I would give this like a little bit below average just based on my expectations. But if you were just
2 3/4 star match, that's sort of how I would put it at.
I would do like 2.5, 2 1/4. So yeah, we're not far off. But so that's the match, and that's the end of the Field of Honor turn. And Matt, I think when we started watching, I thought one of the things I told you was like, we're going to get to see if there are any hidden gems in this tournament. Matt, well, I wouldn't say this tournament had any really terrible things. Like, it was never painful. I don't think there was one hidden gem in this tournament.
No, every match was completely forgettable.
Yeah, so to me, more than this match, that's the biggest failing of this tournament. It's a tournament for mid-card, supposed to elevate them, and I don't think one guy got elevated.
No, I mean, the closest person that I thought really stood out was Colt Cabana, just by virtue of being so much more charismatic than every other person in the tournament.
Yeah, and even he could have done that regardless.
Right.
But I think the other really telling thing is, at one point during this match or this show, Gabe says something like, whoever wins this tournament is going to be shoot right up the card. Matt Striker's next match in Ring of Honor's on the next show is the opener, and I just looked over all his matches in 2004. Most of the time, he's like third from the bottom.
Yeah, he's gone down the card since the tournament started, honestly. And yeah, I mean, I really think that it's pretty clear to me, and maybe justifiably so, that Gabe was very disappointed in Striker when he gave him the ball, and very quickly gave up on him after this.
And I don't blame Gabe for that.
No.
I think one good aspect of Gabe is I think Gabe does show in his Ring of Honor booking that if something isn't working, he will eventually cut ties. Like, he won't go down with the ship. He'll change things. And certainly he did with his push of Matt Striker. But I do feel like it's kind of bad when he spent months talking about how important this tournament is, and then he comes out of it with less of a push than he does going in. Like it kind of makes him look bad for hyping it. But I'm sure he didn't expect the tournament to be this mad.
Yeah, now, and on the other hand, for Matt Striker, he never really gave him a chance to work with, like, their top talent, Like, no, you never saw Matt Striker against AJ Styles. You never saw Matt Striker against Joe until it was a little too late. You never saw Matt Striker against Bryan Danielson or Low Key or, anybody like that. He was always working the same crew of guys. And also just incredible. And, who knows what could have happened if he had actually been given a chance to mix in with the main eventers a little bit earlier.
It's something we mentioned on a previous show, but he was a guy that for a while, early in 2003, felt like he had some steam. He was doing those matches with Chad Collier.
Yeah, I liked his matches. I liked them, for sure.
Yeah, he had that match with Tom Carter, Reckless Youth, that was good. And I mean, I forget exactly how much I liked it, but I remember at that point, it really felt like he had some momentum. And we mentioned on an earlier show that, like, he has so much less momentum at the end of this tournament than he did going into this tournament, a tournament that he wins. Like, in a way, it's kind of like this tournament that was meant to put him over ruins his career. It's so weird.
Yeah, it's kind of sad.
Yeah. I would definitely, if I was him, being like, I wonder what it would be like if I hadn't been in this turn and just had, going to what you said, a couple matches against top flight guys in the second half of 2003 instead. Maybe his push would have been stronger coming out of this year.
Yep.
But anyway, after the match, Gabe says Striker is moving up the card, and a bunch of random undercard dudes like the Carnage Crew, April Hunter, and Slick Wagner Brown come out to congratulate him, but they quickly cut away. From reading like notes, apparently there was a big Matt Striker victory speech he gave that got shit on by the crowd, so they completely cut it out. I felt like even just what they did was kind of bad, where I appreciate that them trying to make it seem like a big deal, but I think it always comes off as dorky when you do like the wrestlers coming out to celebrate with the winner thing, and it's all like really low undercard wrestlers.
Definitely.
Like it's Slick Wagner Brown and April Hunter and the Carnage Crew. Like, just, ooh. Anyway, at this point, something happened on the show that we did not see on the DVD, which was Bill Apter came out and presented Ring of Honor owner Rob Feinstein with the classiest promotion award from Total Wrestling Magazine. This is Mike Johnson writing. Mike Johnson writes, "Isn't that award an oxymoron in the wrestling business?" At this point, Mike Johnson says CM Punk came out and ripped on the crowd and took the award for himself because since he was straight edge, he was better than everyone and therefore was the classiest wrestler. Punk ripped on the crowd and argued with Feinstein. They actually tossed this together on the fly to stall for time as Christopher Daniels was late to the show because of flight problems. Mike writes, I'm not sure this will make the video release of the show. The entire roster then took a huge group photo backstage holding the classiest wrestling promotion award.
So wait, I just want to be clear. They do the whole thing together on the fly, including even the concept of classiest wrestling promotion? Because if so, that's amazing.
I have to think because the award was pre-made that wasn't on the fly.
It wasn't one of those certificates that they just printed out in the back?
It sounds like maybe the Punk thing and maybe even where they placed it was. And we'll get to it a little bit later, but Daniels apparently was very late. He did not even show up to the show until during the Joe-Mark Briscoe match. Ah. So apparently this was done to try and stretch the show out and give him some time. And that brings us actually to the Ring of Honor World title match. Samoa Joe successfully defends when he defeats Mark Briscoe in 14 minutes, 44 seconds when he made him pass out in the rear naked choke. I thought this was a very good match. I really enjoyed this, but it was also a different match than I expected. I thought going in, it's Mark Briscoe versus Big Samoa Joe. Mark will be flying a lot, running around, like stick and moving, and trying to be like the ultimate underdog. Instead, it's like Mark goes toe-to-toe with Joe. There's a lot of clubbering. Like, this is a match where there's no thigh slapping, but there's a lot of really hard, like, legit thuds of, like, arms hitting, like, backs really hard. And just real hard, stiff hitting. Joe lets Mark suplex him around a lot. It actually almost went too far in the other direction where I was thinking, like, little Mark Briscoe is really getting to, like, go mano a mano in a test of, like, fighting and strength and strikes with Joe, which almost took me out of it a little bit. But overall, I thought it was a very good match. And I thought Joe did a good job of... He worked this match where at the end, it didn't feel like this was Joe's toughest match, but also didn't feel like it was a cakewalk for him either, which I think is the right balance you had to strike for this match. Something I posted on Twitter that kind of went a little bit, I don't know, viral is such a horrible word, but it got tweeted around a lot, was Mark Briscoe with what I think is the best sell of a headbutt ever. Mark tries to headbutt Joe a couple times during the match, and Joe being Samoan no-sells it. One time, Joe headbutts him back, and Mark's standing in the corner, and if you haven't seen it, he basically like turns to spaghetti and goes completely limp and falls down like vertically. He implodes and he's wiggling his head back and forth, and his head is like ping-ponging off the turnbuckles like he's a human version of Plinko, that Price is Right game. It's the greatest sell ever, and the crowd actually like laughs and then applauds because it's so great. And yeah, just a really good like stiff match. And before I go throw it to you, Matt, I guess we should explain maybe why it wasn't high-flying. Joe, in the Straight Shooting interview, talks about this match. First, he says that he had a problem with this match going on this early. He says, I knew I couldn't main event this show above Muda, but I wanted to semi-main event this show with this match. Joe says the whole week before the show, he was trying to talk to Gabe into semi-main eventing with this match, but it didn't happen because Gabe wanted to do the half Ring of Honor, half All Japan thing. Joe says there wasn't a lot of confidence in the Joe's Briscoes program at this time, and Gabe thought that people, wouldn't be that into this match because they knew Mark couldn't win. But Joe was like, give us a chance. We can really make something of this match. But he didn't get his way. And then Joe says, this is how bad Mark's knee was before going into this match, where he had hurt it in the Briscoes SAT tag on the afternoon card. And he says Mark's knee was so bad that he was limping around backstage in pain. And he says me and Low Key tried to pop his knee back into place before the match. And then he says, then when Mark comes out, his adrenaline got going. He says, you could barely tell that Mark's knee was hurt. And I think Joe was completely on. Like, if I was watching this match and didn't read that stuff, I wouldn't have known that Mark's knee was apparently in really bad shape. So, Matt, what did you think about the match?
This is one of the rare matches that come up sometimes where you definitely liked it a lot more than I did. I thought it was solid, but I didn't think it was particularly good in the sense of like the best parts of the match, and they were very good, were Joe just being on fire. And Joe, like, this is a great example of Joe at his athletic peak in this match. Like, at one point he does a tope, like, dive, like a, elbow suicida onto Jay Briscoe, who's in the corner, and just, like, lands on his feet after the tope, like just like it was nothing. He does a lot of spots where he like will very quickly brush off Mark offense and then just like smack Mark in the face. Or just start like doing like his 100-hand slap followed by an enziguri that the crowd goes crazy for. He very quickly throws Mark out of the ring, goes for a ole ole kick, but Mark runs away. He does it again later, and Jay pulls him out of the way. At one point, he does this whole like talking on the cell phone reference. Do it during the ole ole kick on Mark. And I guess that's a reference to something that was current in the NFL, but I don't remember exactly what it was.
There was a player who did like a cell phone celebration. He got a $30,000 fine around this time.
Yeah.
And it must have been either Punk or Gabe that came with the idea for Joe to do that, because did you notice on commentary, Punk said something like, I bet some real genius thought of that cell phone gimmick, he says. So I have to think either Gabe or Punk thought of that, and that's like an inside joke.
Yeah, I'm sure that's what it was. Obviously 15 years later, it doesn't ring as relevant, but
yeah.
I appreciate, the no match is designed to be watched 15 years later by a couple of dorks, so good on them. But I thought Joe looked like great athletically. I didn't think the match itself had that much substance to it. And, partially because of his injury. I didn't notice Mark favoring his leg or anything, but I also didn't think he was as good as he usually is. I really thought, Joe shined in the match, but I didn't think the match itself was that much. It was, Mark did, go toe-to-toe with him a little bit, but Joe was on offense for more of this than he normally is in his matches. It was more of a squash than Joe's matches have been normally, certainly more than the one against Jay was. So in that sense, I don't know. It didn't do that much for me, although I thought Joe had a lot of very impressive moments. Mark's big moment was that sell of the headbutt, which I also noted, and it was great. And Mark is obviously super talented, but to me, this wasn't his best night.
I think I appreciated the match because it wasn't what I expected, but I could also see why you'd be disappointed, because I think one thing that is clear watching the match is that he was a lot more grounded than he probably would normally be, and like, just not running around as much, not flying pretty much at all. I really did like the elbow suicida spot, both because it's just a cool move, but I also liked that earlier in the match, like you said, Jay pulls Mark off the chair so Joe can't do the ole kick. And then later on, when Joe does the elbow suicida, he ends up taking out Jay with it, and then he immediately does the ole kick. And what I liked about that was it was just a nice little bit of storytelling, whether intentional or not, of like, it allowed him to do the ole kick, because otherwise, why wouldn't Jay have just tried to stop him again? Well, he can do it now because he took out Jay.
And also, I can't overstate how impressive it is to see Samoa Joe diving out to the ring, elbowing a guy, and landing on his 2 feet, and immediately like going to the ole kick like nothing happened. Like, that is so crazy impressive.
Yeah, and we've talked about a bunch on these recent shows, but like Matt said, this is Joe's athletic prime, not his prime as a worker. Like, watch this match, not only watch those spots, watch how easy he goes up for Mark Briscoe suplexes. Like, he goes up so light for a guy that big.
Yep.
He's just so... I mean, he's just such a special talent in terms of he would become a better wrestler, but at this point, a guy his size that can come off as so intimidating, but also be so agile and quick, is just like an amazing package of talent.
He's not so far off from his peak as a wrestler, honestly, at this point.
No, I mean, we're talking about
a couple months.
Within months, within months, he's having matches that people are going to give 5 stars to. So, yeah. But 2003 is probably a year people don't think of as part of Joe's prime, but he's really good even in this year. Only other thing I'll note is Punk says that the Briscoes' parents are both in the audience tonight, so it was probably a good day for the Briscoe parents because you got to see 3 of your kids' matches in one day. So it's a nice, it's a value trip, Matt.
That's right.
Yeah, good way to do that. So,
and Philadelphia is very close to Delaware.
I don't know geography that well, so I'm going to take your word for it.
It is. I think you can verify this.
I trust you, Matt.
The internet will show you the way.
After the match, CM Punk makes his way to the ring while Joe and Mark are still in it. He gets on the mic and he says the B card is now over and now he's going to ruin the show. I guess one other thing we forgot to mention is that Punk's been on commentary for most of the show up to this point. So, again, with Gabe, although he'll switch off in the second half and do it with Doug for the first time ever.
And probably the last time ever?
I think so. I think it's the only time we ever got the Punk-Doug combination.
Yeah.
Punk continues talking, but then Joe Pye faces him and grabs the mic. He tells Punk that unless he came to fight, to shut the fuck up. And this got a huge pop. And I thought this was just awesome because just like in the same way that I feel Punk is one of the only guys that had the stones to mock and criticize Gabe to his face, it feels like Joe's the only character that really will just be like, shut the fuck up, Punk. Like, just stop it. And the crowd just pops huge for it. I wrote in my notes, Joe is really over tonight. Feels like he hit a new level of stardom with the crowd. Like he feels like one of the most over guys in the company now.
And it's great seeing the Joe Punk stare down, with the benefit of hindsight, knowing that it's going to be probably the feud that made ROH, And
there's a seed there for it, and it's still half a year away.
Right.
Joe tells Punk to get out of his ring, and then they have a lengthy stare down, trading words off mic. Punk tells Joe to calm down. He didn't mean to disrespect him, but his part of the show is over, and so he needs to leave Punk's ring. Punk tries to call out Christopher Daniels, but then Joe grabs the mic again and says that if Punk doesn't leave, he'll have 99 problems, and that bitch won't be one.
I bet you that reference seemed a lot less trite back in 2003 when that song was only a couple of years old.
All I wrote in my notes was the word topical in all capital letters. Yeah. Crowd chants, fuck him up, Joe, fuck him up. And Punk tries to back up to Joe, but then he eventually retreats to the ring apron, so he kind of just, he takes the loss here, is the best way I can put it. The crowd chants, CM pussy. Then Joe leaves the ring, and Punk immediately gets back into the ring, and Gabe says Joe has made his point. So, again, I thought it was really cool that Punk actually showed ass here. Punk is this character who he stands up and has a comeback for everybody. And this is the one time where he had a real stare down with a big name, and Joe's the one guy where he backs down, which I thought really put over Joe.
And I like that Punk just got out of the ring just for long enough for Joe to leave, and then he just jumped right back in the ring.
Yeah, it's such a little shitty thing to do. The second Joe's back, he's like, oh, I'm back running the show now. You just are doing that just because Joe left. But as Joe goes to the back, out comes Christopher Daniels, Dan Moff, and Allison Danger, the Prophecy. Moff jumps Joe, and Punk jumps the Prophecy, and it breaks down into a big brawl with Daniels and Punk brawling in the ring. Joe and Moff are brawling on the outside. Daniels gets the advantage, and he goes to hit the Angel's Wings when Colt Cabana runs in. He breaks it up. Allison Danger runs in to save Daniels, and Punk starts choking her with a towel. So, yes, 31 for 32, man-on-woman violence. Danger gets whipped headfirst into the buckle, which looked pretty ugly. Gabe calls Punk a scumbag for attacking a woman. Matt, you don't get to say it's a great thing for 32 shows and then act like it's the worst thing ever.
It was amazing. It was amazing. All of a sudden, Gabe has a moral center now. I mean, I guess it's good that he's growing, but wow. All of a sudden.
I was brushing my teeth last night, debating in my head, thinking that we were going to do the show today and going, should I give him credit because it's progress, or should I call it out for being the most hypocritical thing ever?
It's really funny however you slice it.
Yeah, I think it's both. Yeah. It's progress and hypocritical, but
yeah, I mean, it should be noted here that CM Punk, they're portraying it as he's trying to murder Allison Danger to the point where he literally says he's going to kill her.
Punk keeps choking Danger as Cabana holds Daniels and makes him watch. Punk grabs the mic and says an eye for an eye, saying he will kill Allison Danger if he doesn't get answers about what happened to Lucy.
He's implying that Lucy is dead. When he's already established that she is fine.
Yeah. She'll show up, I think, on the next show.
Yes.
So Daniels finally gives in and says it was the prophecy behind the Lucy attack, but that But then BJ Whitmer hits the ring and lays out Cabana and Punk with chair shots. Daniels grabs the mic and reveals it was the Prophecy that took out Lucy, but it was just their newest member that did it, BJ Whitmer. Punk is being dragged to the back, screaming at this point in anger. BJ gets on the mic and says he remembered what Punk did to him in Philadelphia earlier this year. Moth comes to the ring, and Daniels wants everyone to celebrate, but Moth is not cool with this. He grabs the mic and he wants to know what the hell is going on. He points out that 2 times this year, Moth swore on his recently deceased father's memory that the prophecy had nothing to do with Lucy's disappearance. Moth calls Whitmer a scumbag and says he can't stand him. Daniels tries to calm Moth down and says Whitmer joining was part of the plan from day one, and he didn't mean to make a liar out of Moth. Daniels asks Moth to suck it up and be a team player, saying that he and Whitmer are both key parts of his game plan. Moth is still pissed, but Daniels eventually talks him into making the prophecy salute and posing with the rest of the group, but it's clear he isn't happy. I thought it's weird what to think about this angle. Like, live they were acting like it wasn't. Live reports said it was acting like it wasn't getting over because they were already bummed out on the Whitmer match, but I thought it turned out like the reaction was okay, and I did like the whole Moth is pissed thing because he swore on his father's grave and wasn't told about it, but I don't think they really go anywhere that interesting with it.
Yeah, I mean, like, you mean like after the show they don't go anywhere that interesting with it?
Yeah. Like it's interesting right now. I don't think it really has a huge payoff to my memory.
I agree. I don't know if that would have been different if, Daniels stayed. But yeah, I agree with you in the sense of, like, I thought that the angle itself, like, you can question the wisdom of doing the whole Lucy thing to begin with, but if you're going to spend months doing it, this is about as good of a payoff as you could reasonably expect, I think. A heel turn, a new era for the prophecy, it makes sense because, Punk has been riding Whitmer for months since he knocked him out, said he was a quitter, made fun of him ceaselessly. So it makes sense that Whitmer would hate, CM Punk and the Second City Saints. Whitmer is a big, he's an up-and-coming star, so it makes sense that Daniels would want him for the prophecy. I think it actually was a pretty good payoff, all things considered. And if you're going to do something with Whitmer, you might as well give his character a reason to exist and give him a mouthpiece in Christopher Daniels. I think it was pretty good booking, and it seemed to get over fine. Like, it wasn't like the biggest angle of all time or anything, but I don't really have any strong criticisms of how they ended up pulling it off, other than, CM Punk didn't have to strangle Alice in Danger.
Yeah, I think Whitmer is not is not a bad wrestler at all. I don't think he's the most exciting choice, but if you're going to give him something to do, this is a good thing to do. Like you said, Daniels is a good mouthpiece for him. And I thought, actually, the way they seated this angle was really good. It was, like, uncharacteristically subtle by Ring of Honor standards. When you look at, they did that match, which Whitmer referenced months and months earlier, where it was Punk versus Whitmer, and it went to a draw when they both got hurt going through a table. And then afterwards, they had the backstage segment where Punk is being a real, smug jackass to Whitmer and be like, you did okay, kid. And then, other than that, they never really talked about, except they always had Punk be a real dick to Whitmer on commentary, like a little bit more than he would for most other people. And what I like is, so often with Ring of Honor, Gabe does not have any subtlety. Like, he'll be like, this guy definitely can't win a match he's going to win, or something like that. And this was one time where they did not go crazy, foreshadowing Whitmer. They did just a good amount, I thought.
Yeah, it was perfect in terms of, like, the amount of teasing they did. That's why I say I can't really knock the booking. Like, I don't have anything particularly negative to say, other than, like, the Lucy thing was probably a bit much to begin with.
Yeah. And then to get some background again on the Daniels lateness thing, I got this from a Christopher Daniels straight shooting ROH shooter review. Christopher Daniels tells a story about barely making it to Final Battle 2003. Since the show was so close to Christmas, Ring of Honor was having a hard time booking Daniels a flight that they could afford. As a favor to Ring of Honor, Daniels actually used his Delta frequent flyer miles to book his own flight to the show.
Wow.
the flight stopped in Cincinnati and was supposed to leave for Philly at 3 or 4 p.m., but a stewardess showed up 1 to 2 hours late, delaying the flight until 6 o'clock, and Daniels is pissed. He's saying in the story, like, this flight attendant showed up and was like, I don't know what you guys are looking at me all angry for. I'm here, aren't I? And Daniels apparently was, like, pissed. So anyway, he says that meant that we got from Cincinnati to Philly at 7:30 or 8. Daniel says the whole time he's getting panicked phone calls from Gabe, and then he's getting panicked phone calls from Allison Danger saying Gabe is panicked. And then, Daniel's like, I'll be there as soon as I can. Gabe apparently said he wasn't even worried about Daniels missing his main event match with Muta, just about this BJ Whitmer angle. He was like, Chris, you have to be here for the angle. Not even the match. You have to be here for the angle. Daniel says he only got to the show during Joe and Mark Briscoe, but was told that CM Punk had ad-libbed a promo to buy them some time. Daniel's opinion on the angle itself, he says, I think it's hard to get angles like this across sometimes, especially the subtle points, especially on the awful house mics. And at this point, if you get this shoot interview, Daniels does a great impression of what it sounds like on the Ring of Honor house match where he goes, I'm gonna he literally does that. And he goes, I thought this turned out well. He says, all things considered. So,
yeah, I would agree with him. I will say this, though. They could have done this angle if Daniels wasn't there. Like, it wouldn't have been as good, but they could have pulled it off. They could not have pulled off a match with Christopher Daniels and Dan Moff versus the Great Muta and Arashi without Christopher Daniels, though. That, I think they would need Christopher Daniels for.
I guess he could have done BJ Whitmer and Moff versus Muta and Arashi, but I mean, you could have had a substitute, but I would have been disappointed.
Oh, man, that match would have not been any good without Christopher Daniels.
Yeah. So, next we're going to intermission, and Gary Michael Capetta is backstage with the Briscoes. Gary puts his arms around both Briscoes and said, it's been a tough first half for you guys. And he does it in such like a fatherly way, and then he laughed. Like, he's got his arms on the Briscoes, like, you guys, it's been tough, hasn't it?
He is ROH's dad.
He really is. He's really likable, actually, in like a nerdy dad way.
Sometimes he is. Sometimes he is. Sometimes it feels like he's asking annoying, like prodding questions, like that makes him not likable. But yes.
Yeah, when he's pissing off Homicide, is like, some people say you don't have the guts, Homicide.
Yeah.
Homicide's just like, what?
Now you got these thugs around. It's like, oh, now you're going to be racist also. Like, okay, fine.
So the Briscoes say they still have the tag titles. They say Joe can come and try and take the tag belts from them. Then the Carnage Crew stumble in. They interrupt. The crew say no disrespect to the Briscoes, but they need to know if Gary's learned what's up. DeVito says Special K has gotten to his family. DeVito also has this giant blue Band-Aid on his forehead, which is really distracting me. Gary tells them he has the scoop. Special K are headed to Chicago to tape Good Times, Great Memories with Colt Cabana. Then, in a really weird moment, DeVito says, bro, that show ain't taped in Chicago. It's taped in this building somewhere. And I just thought this made Gary look like the stupidest person in the world. Like, he believed that Good Times, Great Memories tonight would be taped in Chicago when they're in Philadelphia. And DeVito actually told him, like, are you stupid? Like, it's in this building.
That's fine. Anyway. That's fine. That's Gary's role here.
Well, I thought Gary's role was like, he's the investigative journalist that gets us all the scoops. And meanwhile, Gary's like, oh, they're definitely taping in Chicago.
Yeah, I guess. Although I don't think you're always supposed to take seriously that Gary gets the scoops. You know, like he's supposed to be a little bit like annoying about it. That's how my impression was. Like I didn't think anyone was like. I never thought that Gary was like supposed to be portrayed as like the mean Gene, where you're supposed to take him really seriously. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I kind of thought he was at first, but then I feel like his character just became more just the guy who does interviews, not necessarily.
Yeah.
It was toned down. Gary's got all the scoops, but
he's a little bit of a butt of jokes.
Yeah.
My favorite is when Homicide calls him Michael.
That was great. So yeah, anyway, Carnage Crew storm off. The angle continues, and we start the second half. Now this is the 4-match series, All Japan versus Ring of Honor. Match 1, CM Punk and Colt Cabana defeated Turmeric Storm of Kazushi Miyamoto and Tomoaki Hanma in 16 minutes 34 seconds when Punk pinned Hanma after he hit the Pepsi plunge. Yes, this is that Hanma from New Japan recent years, and this is kind of a weird middle stage in his career where he had kind of gained some little bit of fame on places like Death Valley Driver, where he had done these really great Big Japan death matches. They were kind of like death matches for people that don't like death matches, where they actually had some good wrestling and crazy weapon spots. And he had left Big Japan, so this was like a weird middle time of his career where for like 1 year he had this tag team. I don't know why it's called Turmeric Storm. I don't know if they like the spiced turmeric. I don't know.
Good for you.
Very good for you. But Matt, what did you think about? Do you think that these guys did put on their working boots and decided not to treat this like a vacation?
I think this was the best match of this half, personally. Of because the show was so good, they had two halves. This was the best match of the second half. I liked the entrance that Cabana and Punk had, because it was sort of like Punk was doing his brooding, you are now one of us entrance, like he was kneeling and looking all serious, and all of a sudden Copacabana starts playing, and he rolls his eyes, and Cabana comes up behind him and starts dancing to the ring, and Punk continues to walk down looking all serious, but only it's Copacabana playing. I thought that was a really
odd couple.
Yeah, I like
friends forever.
Yes, I liked. Yeah. Do we know where they're at right now?
Chicago.
Oh.
No, I think suing each other.
Okay. But is it amiable suing? No, just kidding. So as far as the match itself, I thought that the early part of the match, the crowd was kind of quiet. They, kind of were getting used to it. They're probably actually as quiet as they've been all night, except for maybe parts of the Field of Honor match. But, and it gets a little bit of a methodical pace. There's some fun stuff with Cabana, he pumps up his boots, they have the basketball pumps on them, which I can't remember any other times that Cabana had that, but that's before Cena was doing that, definitely, right?
Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty cool. And at one point Cabana does a Billy Goat's curse plus a camel clutch with Punk at the same time on, I believe it was Miyamoto. I thought that was pretty cool. But really, it's the second half of the match that gets things exciting. Once Hanma gets the tag, which isn't that hot of a tag, but they get the crowd into it. Because he does a DDT, flatliner combo on the Second City Saints, and that gets the crowd going. Punk kind of military presses Hanma off the top, almost Flair style, and they just get into a whole sequence with a lot of moves, so I guess I'll just go through a bunch of them. Cabana does a jumping Rana on Miyamoto, which I think is pretty impressive. You don't really see it that often from Cabana, where he literally just jumps from the floor, like Scott Steiner style, into a Frankensteiner type move. And Miyamoto does a swanton, then they do a chop battle between Punk and Hanma. Punk wins that, and then Punk goes for a dive, a tope, but Miyamoto spears him, and everyone's knocked down, and the crowd kind of does a standing ovation. At one point, Punk does a top rope drop kick, which is another move you don't really see too much from him, which I think is a pretty exciting sequence. Then there's a blockbuster by Hanma. Punk kicks out of that. That's the first big kick out of the match. There's a Doomsday Superplex on Punk, where I believe Miyamoto is on Hanma's shoulders, and they superplex Punk. Cabana saves that, hits the Asai moonsault. There's an arm trap DDT by Punk, and that's a really hot near fall. Then Pepsi plunge on Hanma, and Hanma takes it I've seen this in highlight videos. Hanma takes this on the top of his head.
Crazy bump.
It is insane. So the Second City Saints win. It's 1-0. As far as just these tag team matches, where just a lot of cool moves down the stretch, I thought this was a really good version of that. I thought it was a quite good match, and the crowd got really into it, and I really enjoyed it.
I agree with you on this match. I thought this was a good match, and I think I agree. Thinking about it, I think I agree with you. This was the best match, in my opinion, of the second half as well. I would say what made this match good to me was it didn't have a story, but it had a good flow. It almost felt like it had a story, even though it didn't, in the sense that I felt like it just, maybe not flow, but good pace, in the sense that it started off slow and it kept getting faster and faster and faster and more exciting, and it ended at the right time. I felt I just felt like they progressed it well throughout the match, where at first you're this is a bit slow, but then it just keeps getting better, and then it ends at the really exciting point with that crazy Pepsi plunge bump. And yeah, it was just a good, solid action tag match. I felt like Hanma and Cabana were the stars of this match. Punk a little bit like, it was one of those matches where Punk, other than a whiffed spinning back elbow, didn't really do anything wrong. But there were a couple things, like even that flying dropkick, which was impressive that he tried it, but he doesn't ever look graceful on some of these sequences. It just reminds you, again, how hard he had to work, how not a natural athlete he is, and how hard he had to work to become as great a wrestler as he became, and how amazing that is to me. But I felt like Hanma in particular, he has real good charisma. He played to the crowd a little bit, and he looked, for a guy that apparently was rumored to have been one of the guys treating this like a vacation before they told him he couldn't. He had full commitment. Like, he takes a whip into the guardrail and he goes like vertical. And on that Pepsi Plunge, he did not have to take the bump that way.
No.
Like, Hanma, that's kind of the story of his career, is he just full commitment to every move, every bump. And that's probably why he broke his neck in the last couple of years. But
yeah, he definitely, of the guys who worked their ass off on this show, when they saw that big ROH crowd, Hanma is the one that you definitely can say, okay, like he definitely did.
And I think Joe even said in his shoot, like, he singled out Hanma and Miyamoto for guys that, like, were, like, stunned that the crowd really liked them and then worked harder. Like, I wouldn't surprise you if once they saw 1,500 people that were not, like, booing them as evil foreigners, Hanma probably got in his head, like, I should give these guys some effort. I should give them a show. And he did, I think. He gave them whatever he got paid, he earned, in my opinion.
Yeah, he was great.
Not that anyone in this match was bad, but
no. I mean, Punk and Cabana were great. Miyamoto definitely stood out less than Honma did, but they both worked really hard.
Yeah. After the match, Punk screams into the camera. He declares war on Christopher Daniels. Then both teams all raise their hands together. The crowd loudly applauds, and they chant for Ring of Honor. Then All Japan, and then Miyamoto holds and waves a Japanese flag. So they left that in, a little bit of color. Next up is probably what was, I bet you, it's hard for me to go back in time in my head, but I bet you this was probably from a not Muda like standpoint, the second most anticipated match from like a work rate, quote unquote. I'm not trying to sound like Tony Khan here, but a work rate standpoint. That would be AJ Styles defeated Kaz Hayashi.
Is work rate a bad word now?
No, but we're all just, everyone's talking about, because Tony Khan did this interview with Dave Meltzer the day before we're recording this, and he used like work rate multiple times, like he was from the 90s. It was like kind of like adorable it was adorkable, Matt. It was adorable in a nerdy way. Like he was like,
did he give the Scott Keith definition of work rate of like ratio of action to inaction, and you have to have a stopwatch out to see like what the actual work rate quotient was?
We need you there. That's why, like, Tony Khan's apparently into advanced analytics. We need you, like, working out work rate formulas for him, Like, clearly, Tony, you should hire this guy because his work rate to rest hold ratio is 8-1. That's off the charts here in the PWG area. Like, anyway, AJ Styles defeats Kaz Hayashi via pinfall in 14 minutes, 49 seconds after he hit the Styles Clash. The Observer wrote in their notes from, again, Dave hadn't seen the show at this point, but this was from the live notes he was sent. AJ Styles pinned Kaz Hayashi with the Styles Clash in what some considered the best match on the show. The fans reacted to Styles as the biggest non-Japanese star of the show. I'm going to say it, this match was a little disappointing to me, and I would not consider this the best match on the show. In fact, at best, I might say this was the fourth or fifth best match on the show. Mm-hmm. I think I would put the Walters match ahead. I'd put the match we just reviewed, the Turmeric Yum Yum Tasty Storm match ahead of this. I'd put for me personally, I know I liked it more than you, I'd put Mark and Joe ahead of this, and I'd put Danielson and Jay ahead of this. But it was not terrible. And part of me wonders if I was disappointed by this match because it was not as good as I thought, as I wanted it to be, or if it's because it was a different kind of match than I wanted it to be. Because I thought this would be a very fast-paced, high-flying match, but my memories were wrong. This is a very, like, grounded match with not a ton of flying, nearly none, actually. And it's more about these two guys hitting each other hard, Hayashi kind of grounding AJ, often with a chin lock. And there is stuff in this match, like, it does make sense because, like, Kaz works on AJ's head a lot. He does a lot of chin locks. He does a brainbuster. He does a pile driver. He does a crossface. So all that, it's working on a body part. And there's some really good heated exchanges in this match. And again, they're hitting each other really hard. There's some crisp work here. There's a really cool spot where Kaz does a back handspring off the ropes, but instead of doing like a drop kick or something, he does like a back kick, like a mule kick, which I thought was cool. And this match is I would say it's like a low good. It's a solidly entertaining match, in my opinion. It's just not what you'd expect off of Kaz Hayashi versus AJ Styles on a big show. And I don't know quite why. I don't feel like I'm explaining great why it quite misses for me. Like, maybe you have a better explanation, or maybe you disagree. Like, what did you think?
I basically agree with everything you said. I would probably put it fourth best match of the night after Walters, Xavier, Danielson, and Briscoe, and Honma and Miyamoto against the Second City Saints. I thought that the first few minutes of the match were like what I would have wanted the match to be. I thought the opening of the match was awesome, especially there's this part where, okay, so AJ does this thing where Hayashi whips him into the guardrail and he jumps over like he always does, but AJ just keeps going, like he disappears into the crowd, and like then he eventually just like wanders back through.
That was so weird. If anyone knows what he was doing, tell us.
Yeah. It was interesting. And then they get back into the ring, and all of a sudden they do this, like, no-selling chop battle, and AJ is, like, super fired up, and it turns into this forearm battle, and AJ ends it with, like, this huge kick to the leg. So Kaz says, "Fuck you," and kicks back, and brainbusters him, and the crowd's going nuts. And that was awesome. And then at that moment, Kaz puts on a chin lock, and the match just slows to a crawl. Like, and that to me is where the match kind of gets off its game. Like, Kaz, I think, was like, he might not have just been mentally prepared to work a match at that intensity, and he just doesn't after that. Like, there's some other cool spots, like when AJ hits his big discus clothesline, but Kaz clotheslines him at the same time, and they do a double knockdown. And then, there's a crippler crossface, which AJ comes close to tapping. And then, shortly after, AJ just wins with the Styles Clash. So I thought the match, like, at the very beginning was on pace to be really good. And for whatever reason, Hayashi was just like, yeah, I'm gonna slow this baby down. And it wasn't long enough to justify being slowed down to that degree at that point, because it didn't go on that much longer. So to me, that was the flaw of the match. Like, it was just like, they toned it down, but didn't really bring it all the way back up for any length of time.
It felt like it was a weird match in structure because, like you said, the first few minutes were the best minutes, and they were like super, super like 9 out of 10 intensity level. And then the rest of the match, it's more Kaz grounds AJ, lets him up for a couple hot spots, grounds him again, back and forth like that. It was like almost like the match in reverse. Like the hot stuff should be at the end, shouldn't it? Not
yeah. I mean,
like hot start. Oh, sorry.
You can start off hot like that, but then you want to be like you'd assume that you'd build it back up for the end. Yeah, but it feels like the match ended. It feels like the match ended before they could do their final like 8 minutes.
Yeah, and I would say this is the first of maybe multiple examples on this show where I didn't feel this way about the last match, but on this match, maybe Kaz was not. I don't think he was mailing it in, but I also don't feel like he was giving his absolute full effort here.
I agree with that.
He's not on vacation, but he's not at work either, is the best way to put it. He's somewhere in the middle. I guess this is also the first match where we get just Doug and Punk on commentary. And at one point during the match, Punk asks Doug's IQ, and Doug says he's 124, and Punk says he's a Mensa-level genius at 138. One, I wonder if those are true or not. And two, it's funny that, like, they just both know their IQs off the top of their head. Like, I'm a 124.
I think Punk was probably making fun of Raven there, right? Because Raven, is in Mensa, isn't he? Or he says he is?
I think, at least he says, yeah.
Yeah.
At least he says he is.
I'm pretty sure that's what that was all about.
Oh, and one other tidbit, I don't know if this is true or not. I would guess it is, but Doug actually said during this match that Doug says these two wrestle each other in WCW, which obviously we know is true, but then he says Kaz Hayashi is the first wrestler to ever take the Styles Clash. I don't know if that's true or not. It'd be interesting if it was, I guess. But moving on, we get the semi-main event, and from a work rate standpoint, this was probably going in, I bet you, the most anticipated match on the card. It is Satoshi Kojima defeating Homicide, escorted to the ring by Julius Smokes, via pinfall in 13 minutes, 11 seconds after he hits a lariat. Matt, I guess I'll hand it to you. There's obviously kind of a big story that happens within this match.
Yeah, so Homicide never gets to really do much in the match, right? Because the early part of the match, you know, like the big story is like Low-Ki is in Homicide's corner, and you've kind of talked about that before. Basically, the deal is Low-Ki was in town for a 3PW show, and Homicide just asked ROH if he could be in the corner, and so they said yes. And Monster Mac is there too, and they all mention on comment, like Gabe mentions on commentary, that, you know, they had a sit down, because, you know, last time we saw Low-Ki in ROH, you know, they never mentioned about how Low-Ki bailed from the match, but they did, you know, they were feuding, they were calling each other bitches and all this stuff. So Gabe said they have a sit down and now they're friends again. Basically, that was what it was. But in reality,
Gabe tried to tie up that loose end, at least.
Yeah, I appreciated that. But, you know, according to the Observer at the time, there were no plans at this point to use Low-Ki for anything more than this, although he does make a one-shot appearance on a couple shows after this.
Yeah.
But you know, so that was the big thing. You know, but really, it's Kojima. Basically, you know, he's doing like comedy stuff, like he's like choking Homicide in the ropes, and the referee is counting, and Kojima's like, I don't understand, and then he does it again, and he's like, I'm Japanese, goddammit, and like, but he says it like in perfect English, and they're like, you just spoke English, and you know, he's doing a lot of like crowd work and stuff, and he seems to be having a blast, and the crowd loves him, you know, and they think he's great. He's like crotch chopping in Julius Smokes' direction. Homicide does a great tope. You know, it seems really on point, and then Kojima belly to bellies him on the floor. Homicide lands on his head. The announcers immediately acknowledge it, and this time it's not obnoxious because it was very obvious that he landed on his head.
Yeah.
And from that point on, Homicide can't really do much of anything. Like he does his offense, but he does it very slowly. He repeats spots a couple times. Like he's clearly completely out of it. You know, like he goes to hit an Ace Crusher, but like he turns into a DDD because he can't do it right. Then he hits an Ace Crusher. Then he hits another Ace Crusher because it seemed like he forgot that he did it already. Kojima hits a Lariat for 2, then another for 3, and so he wins the match. But really, you know, it's mostly the story of Homicide has clearly been seriously injured, and the match fell apart because of that. And it could have been something really good because the crowd really loved Kojima early.
Yeah, this turned out to be obviously not good. It's weird because to me this was a story of 2 matches where the first half it was interesting to me because like Kojima I don't think was treating this match seriously. Like he was treating it like he was having more fun interacting with everyone else but Homicide. Like he seemed to be fuddled by Julius Smokes, and then eventually he started like crotch chopping him. He was playing to the crowd a lot. He was interacting with the referee. At one point in this match, I think right after Homicide gets like rocked, Kojima grabs a camera and like takes a picture from someone in the crowd. He's just Kojima's having a lot of fun just getting the crowd to laugh, and the crowd's eating it up, and it's really entertaining, and Kojima's really charismatic, but at the same time, I felt kind of bad for Homicide, because it felt like Homicide's taking this seriously and wants to have a really great match, and Kojima, at least in the first half, is just fucking around and entertaining the crowd and having a good time, but not really, it felt like taking it seriously, and what I'll always wonder is, would the second half have been, like, really epic, because I know Homicide has said how that's one of the biggest disappointments of his career because Kojima, for those who don't know, was one of Homicide's heroes. You know, he took some of his moves from Kojima, and like I think he said in one interview I found that like he's really sad that the fans didn't get to see the rest of the match they had planned. So, and I've definitely seen matches where guys are like joking around, and then when it kicks into a high gear, they stop joking around and it becomes this great match. But obviously, we'll never get to see that because once, like everything Matt said is true, once Homicide gets knocked out, or not knocked out, but knocked loopy, he still is doing moves. It's just, Homicide has said in interviews, he doesn't remember what the rest of the match was supposed to be. And he's repeating spots, and he just...
Yeah. And by the way, by the way, on an honorable mention, a couple months ago, they did a show on Final Battle 2003. And Jeff Schwartz actually says that even as of like a couple of years ago, Homicide was still talking about how disappointed he was in this match. Like, it's still something that eats at him, like, so many years later.
Yeah, and I've heard that show too. And again, an honorable mention, another really good Ring of Honor podcast, and they've done a recent episode on the show. So if you can't get enough of Final Battle 2003 talk, there's a great place to go for that after you listen to us.
And check out that show in general. It's awesome.
Yeah, but yeah, I actually found a couple quotes from Homicide from interviews in recent years. There's one with a website called the Indie Corner where Homicide says, Kojima gave me a belly-to-belly overhead suplex, and I got knocked out. All I remember is Steve Mack, Low-Key, and CM Punk checking on me. The next day, I traveled with the SATs and All Japan roster to Texas, and all I'm thinking is, I hope I don't have a concussion, and I'm thankful I didn't. Kojima's the man, and I want a rematch, this time with no outside-the-ring suplex, LOL.
How did he not have a concussion if he can't remember?
That's the problem. I feel like there was this weird defensiveness with concussions because remember a few shows ago when we talked about the Dan Moff low-key kick where low-key knocked Dan Moff completely out cold? I remember the Observer report at that time was he didn't even have a concussion. And I was like, how can he be knocked unconscious and not have a concussion? Like,
yeah, what's a concussion then?
Like, did people in 2003 not know what concussions were, or were they just in denial? Like, if your brain hits your skull so hard that you lose consciousness or memory, I hate to tell you this, that's a concussion. You know, a concussion is when, for those who don't know, is when your brain is sitting in your skull and there's a little bit of fluid that's supposed to like keep your brain from hitting your skull. When your head moves so fast, it hits the side of your brain hits the side of your skull. It bruises your very fragile brain. That's a concussion. So it's really weird here reading multiple injuries in 2003 where guys clearly got severely effed up, and like newsletters report, didn't have a concussion. Like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah.
Didn't have a concussion. There was one other interview I found with Homicide where he did an interview with a guy named Alan Wojcik, I think. I might be mispronouncing that. I apologize if I am. But Homicide said, people say it's fake, but I was legitimately knocked out. I admire Kojima. He's a hero of mine, along with Masachono. He says, we had a great match right up to the moment I got knocked out. I don't know if I would say it was a great match. It was mostly, again, Kojima fucking around and having a good time.
But for like 6 or 7 minutes, I mean, it was a very entertaining match. Let's say that.
It was very entertaining. Homicide then says, I forgot the rest of the match. It was the biggest match of my career, but one day I will get a rematch and it will be 1,000 times better. I guarantee that. And that's the part that's a little bit heartbreaking because, I mean, Homicide's in his 40s now. Kojima is probably not that long for the world either. Yikes,
dude.
He's not going to die, but he likes bread. He's not going to die. But yeah, it's sad that clearly this was one of his heroes and someone he was super pumped about wrestling, and I don't think he's ever going to get that chance. Like, for all those people that do these weird, I know you'd have to get New Japan's permission, but people like to do all these like crazy Joey Janela things. Someone, if you can, try and book Homicide versus Kojima again. Like, do what you can. Help a guy out.
Well, Joey Janela, you should do it. Like,
exactly.
Who else is going to do it?
Should be booking. Do a Kojima Homicide match. Just one. Just give him the second chance.
Gabe, do you talk to Joey Janela? Tell him about it.
I mean, I bet you there would be interest in it if you really just told the story in like a 5-minute documentary. Like, there's a story to be told there of, this was my hero, I had one chance with him, it got ruined, all I want to do is have this match again. Like,
ooh,
that would draw interest.
You and me, our voices are going to be in a video package for a match.
That would be great if we were, like, the reason, like, we started some crazy, like, word-of-mouth campaign. I don't know if I want to go that far, but... Like,
yeah, I don't think it's going to happen, but okay.
Yeah, but we do have some people that work in indie wrestling. I know it's very unlikely, but it probably would mean the world to that guy. So maybe try it. But so that's that. And then after the match, Homicide lays on the mat as his posse checks on him. Eventually he gets up, and after some hesitation, he shakes Kojima's hand, which is a pretty big deal because Homicide was not a handshaking type character. He would occasionally, and then I wrote in my notes, poor Steve Corino, he never knocked out Homicide, and he didn't get a handshake. because we just had the last show where Carino really wanted that handshake. He wouldn't get it. Kojima then gets on the mic and he talks a little bit and he says he wants to come back. And I write, I thought you didn't speak English, Kojima. Here you are talking. I mean, it wasn't great English, but it was clear English. Then we cut to a very brief backstage, cringeworthy segment where Jerry Lynn is doing a backstage promo that is not on this show. And he goes, Ring of Honor, Pure Wrestling title. Now that's what I'm talking about, because that's exactly what I'm made of. And that's the entire segment.
He's made of the Pure Wrestling title. It never even existed. Didn't even exist at this point, but he was made of it.
And again, it's such a like you mentioned this earlier. What Pure Wrestling is getting weirder and weirder, because at different times this year, Gabe has been like, Matt Stryker versus Chad Collier. That's Pure Wrestling. But then he's like, Bryan Danielson versus Jay Briscoe. That's the Pure Wrestling. And now it's like Jerry Lynn. That's Pure Wrestling. It's like all these things are kind of different.
Yeah. Well, clearly the thing that makes something Pure Wrestling is that you have a limited amount of rope breaks.
That's the thing that I've always been talking, Matt. Like, all these times I've been watching great wrestling matches, I've been like, there's too many rope breaks.
Yeah, it's not fair if they get all these rope breaks.
I want to have to keep count during a wrestling match.
Exactly.
Where's the wrestling for me, Matt? It's coming in 2004. But finally, we get the main event of the night. And technically, it's an actual official All Japan Pro Wrestling World Tag Team title match. They even have Steven DeAngelis read a written proclamation signed by Stan Hansen, All Japan official style. It's Arashi and the Great Muta defend and defeat the Prophecy, Christopher Daniels, and Dan Moff with Allison Danger in 16 minutes, 5 seconds when Muta pinned Christopher Daniels after hitting the Shining Wizard. Matt, what did you think about the effort level in this match, since so much of the reporting was made of the effort level? And also, the reporting said that the loudest pop in Ring of Honor history was when Great Muta hit the Shining Wizard. Do you think that was the loudest pop we've heard so far? Because I don't know.
Nope. It wasn't. So he got a very big pop when he came out. His introduction got a pretty big pop. The Shining Wizard got a quite big pop, but none of it could match the pop that Just Incredible received when he made his surprise return in Massachusetts. I think you can agree with me on that.
Like, that just sounds glib, but Matt is telling the truth. Like, as weird as it is, Just Incredible got a bigger pop in Boston than the Great Muta got for. I don't know why, but he did. It's not a lie.
No, it's true. But it was a good pop. Nothing to sneeze at. As far as the match itself, by the end of the match, Muta did what he needed to do. You know what I mean? Like, his effort wasn't astounding, but he wasn't super lazy. He brought a lot of intensity to everything he did. Like his timing of blowing the mist in the air, right? The green mist in the air to scare Daniels. That was really good. Then at the end, when he blew the red mist into Moff's eyes, like all that stuff was great. The timing of the Shining Wizard was really good. Really though, the Prophecy was who made the match. Moff did a lot of like stooging and being like, oh, what'd he do? Where'd he come up with that miss from? How'd he get out there? Referee, check him, all that stuff. Daniels kept the match moving. I'd say the match wouldn't have had a lot of movement if it wasn't for Daniels. But, Muta, I don't think did so much more than you would have expected him to do on this show. He certainly didn't put in an epic performance or anything. Arashi really sucked. Like, he did one cool spot where he did like a standing drop kick, right? And that was kind of cool. But even the announcers, which Punk and Doug, were surprised by that because clearly they didn't want to say it, but he had sucked until that point. Almost going so far as Punk being like, I don't know how much experience this Arashi has, but, Muta obviously has the most experience, but, Arashi might be inexperienced. And then Doug is like, I got to check on this, but I think he was wrestling like 15 years ago at the Tokyo Dome, or like at the Crockett Cup.
Yeah.
Like,
Arashi was 41 or 42 at this point.
Yeah. So like he was just so shitty that they were like, oh, he must just be totally like some green sumo wrestler that they plucked out of thin air. And even me at the beginning was like, why did they even have him here? And I'm like, oh, he was one of the tag team champions, I guess. Like, but whew, boy, was he bad. Like, just everything he did was slow. He had no charisma. I've never really watched him in Japan. Maybe he's much better there. But he was bad here, like, really bad.
He made the finals of the Champion Carnival against Kojima this year, like in 2003.
I was going to say, this year?
No, I mean the year that we're covering here.
Yeah.
Like, they were pushing him big.
Yeah, at 41.
Yeah.
But I don't know. The match itself was not much. I think Daniels kept it entertaining. It was a nice little showcase. I think the crowd got what they needed from the Great Muta. I don't really have any strong complaints. I don't think anybody could have reasonably expected for this to be a great wrestling match. It was an opportunity for Muta to appear in ROH and like do his big moves, and he did them. He even teased going for a moonsault at one point, and Doug was like, "Man, could you imagine if he pulled it out in the U.S.?" He didn't, but he did.
That's what I wanted to bring up. Oh man, you finish first.
But he did the Shining Wizard, and it was good, and they won, and everyone was happy.
So, all right. So, what I thought about this, I thought this match was like really interesting as a time capsule in the sense of this was like the equivalent of like the formerly big band. Although, I mean, Muta was still a big star, but like the band that plays the county fair, and they're not trying super hard, but they play the hits, and so people are happy. Like Muta this was a very simple, structured match where Allison Danger interfered at one point, and from then on. Muta was the face in peril for quite a while and just laid on the mat as Daniels worked over him. And, Muta didn't, like, I thought if this was Muta trying hard in the good gear, quote unquote, I'd like to see what he would have done if this match was a vacation, because
fewer facial expressions.
Yeah, he did have lots of charisma and emoting, but like he really just did some selling and some emoting and some of his greatest hits. Like he did the big like power drive elbow. He did 2 missed spots. He did the Shining Wizard at the end for the finish. So he gave the fans the hits. And what I think is interesting from a time period is the fans were more than happy to just see the greatest hits. And I feel like fans today have a higher standard. Like, I feel like today, if all a guy did was like his 3 or 4 signature moves, wrestling fans today are exposed so much more often to like the big Japanese stars. They'd be like, like Okada only did that. He only did the Rainmaker. He didn't do anything else. He just laid around. Like, I think people, I don't want to say spoiled because I don't think it's wrong to expect more. But back then, like watching this match, the crowd it seemed perfectly happy that that's what they got from Muta.
I'm going to disagree with you there, actually. Like, because I think, yes, for like an Okada, I agree with you. But for someone who would be the equivalent of a Muta, like Muta was clearly a guy who was like on the tail end of his career, right? Like everyone knew his knees were shot. And I think someone the equivalent of that wouldn't be expected to do much. Like I saw at the Joey Janela show before SummerSlam, it was Jinsei Shinsaki against Joey Janela, right? And like Shinzaki, he didn't do anything that great. Like, it was a pretty slow match. Like, it was not that long. The crowd still was pretty happy with it. I think when someone's considered a legend, they can get away with a lot less than somebody who's considered like a top worker in their prime. Does that make sense?
You know what? You swung me over. You're right, because I forgot how much of a legend he is. Like it's a weird thing to talk about Muta in 2003 because I think he was 2001's Wrestling Observer Wrestler of the Year.
Right. He had like an amazing like renaissance year in 2001 where he had these matches against like Tenryu and stuff. Yeah,
but you're exactly right. And I think the problem is I kind of forgot that like by 2003 he was more back, I think, in the just be happy he's still walking mode.
Yeah.
Like, even though 2 years earlier he was this guy that was, he's revitalized and the best wrestler in the world. At this point, I think people were just happy. And like you just said, people, if they know a veteran is like a legend and is physically declined, they are more accepting. So you're right about that. Okay, Matt, I might have been wrong about that, but how about this? There's one more change in time. Don't you think it's weird? Well, not weird, but isn't it kind of surreal that we got this with Muta and we got this with Kobashi, where both guys, when they came to Ring of Honor, thought that they were going to have to be heel and that no one would know who they were or like them. Like, that's never going to happen again.
Definitely not.
Like, it's so weird. We were like the last generation to see that because, we'll get into it years later, but if we're not dead by then. But like Kobashi and Joe, Kobashi's like, oh, I play the heel. And Joe has to talk him out of it. Like, no, everyone is going to love you. And it's the same here. Like, if I can find another note from the Christopher Daniels shoot interview, let's see if I can find it here. This is Christopher Daniels on the match from his straight shooting interview. Daniels says it was a great honor to work Muta. He never thought he'd get an opportunity to wrestle him and describes him as beyond a star. Daniels says Muta was easy to work with, but the funny thing was Muta thought he should work heel, and Daniels had to tell him that Muta could stab him with a knife and the crowd would still cheer him. Daniels says he thinks Muta finally realized what Daniels was talking about only when he made his entrance and heard the reaction. Daniels thinks Muta didn't realize what wrestling fans really thought of him, that maybe he thought it'd be like it was in the dying days of WCW. And then Daniels goes on to say that the match itself was only so-so, but was designed to showcase all of Muta's stuff, and it's not like Muta was moving fast at that point in his career. So it's just funny to think that Daniels had to like tell Muta, like he didn't believe it, like you're not going to be the heel here, no matter even if you want to be the heel. And nowadays wrestlers, they're never going to have a moment like that again. Every wrestler knows that they're got fans around the world now.
Yep, I mean the internet now is so ubiquitous. There wasn't YouTube in 2003. There certainly wasn't like streaming services for all the different, for all the different Japanese shows. If you were an American watching Japanese wrestling, you really had to go out of your way to see it. And now you really don't. So that's, and I think everyone knows it, and that's such a huge difference.
But so this match a little bit below average as a wrestling match, but as just a fun, if you can put yourself in the mindset of fans are really excited to see Muta, I think it's entertaining. It's like a fun little piece of Ring of Honor history.
One thing I'd like to add about it. So Punk historically on commentary has really like given it to Allison Danger, right? He's made fun of her looks, called her a sea hag. I think he said again, she looks like the sea hag from Popeye, and everything is all good, clean, misogynistic, fun, except like what makes it different is that according to the timeline of this show, just a few hours, really like an hour before this, CM Punk literally tried to murder Allison Danger. He tried to strangle her to death. And now he's like, oh, look at her. She's not good looking. I don't know. It just feels a little strange to me. Also, she was just attempted to be murdered. Now she's like, I'm going to distract the referee.
For some reason, you and that voice going, look at her, she's not even good looking, haha, is like maybe my favorite moment in the history of the show.
Oh, God.
Like there's something about that is really hitting the spot, and that spot is my funny bone, Matt. But,
like I said, we both have terrible senses of humor.
And we're glad for all the hundreds and hundreds of people that also do listening to us. Thank you. But, did you notice there was another weird thing about commentary where it's still Punk and Doug, and then he's starting the match. Punk is trying to call this like, this is a big match. I'm going to put aside that my feelings for Daniels and call this straight because it's such a big match. And then Doug and even Gabe gets on the mic, and they keep trying to hype up a Prophecy Second City Saints 6-man tag happening on the next show, and Punk is like trying to call the match, but he keeps getting dragged into like having to talk about this feud. Like, it was such a weird moment where like Punk's having to be like, come on guys, we should call the match and not talk about the feud I'm in. Like, why are you talking about, like, he's at that moment CM Punk was a better commentator than those two.
Right. He was like, I'm just going to try to be a wrestling fan here. Which is, it's good that he went out of his way to say it, because it would be weird if he was just ignoring the fact that these guys that he's calling are his sworn enemies. But yes, it is weird.
And what else? There was something else I was going to say. Arashi. We got to talk. So Arashi, I agree. He wasn't good except for that one drop kick. For those who don't know, Arashi was like a former sumo, I think, kind of a chubby, big, burly guy. And there was something about him though, like he wasn't good, but I also couldn't take my eyes off of him. Like, he has this magnetism. And there was a moment where, I know, like, a lot of Japanese wrestlers, they're classically, like, stoic, and that might have just been what Arashi was. There was a moment where I swear to God, it looked like Arashi was about to fall asleep, leaning on the ropes on the ring apron. And there's a moment where, at one point in this match, Daniels runs over and he attacks Arashi, who's standing on the apron since he's not the legal man. He's just like being a dick. And Arashi's response is to hold the ropes and then kneel for a second and not much else until Daniels prompts him like a second time, like, come on, get in the ring. And then Arashi makes a half-hearted effort to get into the ring. And then Punk and Doug start coming up with reasons why Arashi wouldn't run in the ring after Daniels attacked him. And then they seem to settle on just maybe, I think one of them, like maybe Punk says, maybe Arashi just didn't feel like moving. And like that's the reason. He just doesn't want to move.
I mean, that's the funny thing is that is the reason.
And so I had to look this up because I think you'll appreciate this. Given how much you didn't like this, or I mean, I agree that for the most part, Arashi wasn't good. Even if I think he has this weird it factor that he has what Stryker is missing. But so Matt, I dug up while we were talking. I went into the archive website to find the old Death Valley Driver live report because this was, I think, 4 or 5 of the Death Valley Driver guys went to the show live and they wrote an extensive live report. Here, guess which people liked Arashi, Matt? I'm going to tell you, it's the Death Valley Driver guys. So
yeah.
Let me read a couple quotes, and not to make fun of them.
You're going to tell me that Phil Schneider enjoyed Arashi?
I was a big fan of Death Valley Driver, and I didn't agree with everything. And it was a big part. It was a great review site, and even if I didn't agree with everything, but here's a couple quotes. Given once you said that Arashi was so bad, I just had to dig up these quotes.
They were the early days of the anti-conventional wisdom trend that is very popular these days.
So here's Dean Rasmussen. He says the Arashi dropkick was fucking awesome, and I popped like a fucking monkey. If you don't like Arashi, you can suck my dick. So that.
All right. Hey, man.
You can suck it. So, and then I think Pogo P I forget which one. I'm sorry, but I'm just finding this quote here. No, wait. Who? Let me just try and find it. God, I'm trying to find it. There. Let me see here. Match is okay spectacle, as everyone is popping hard for what currently passes for Muda stuff, while we're the only ones cheering for Arashi. There was one throwback in the crowd trying to get a "you fat fuck" chant started for Arashi that went over like a fart in church. Arashi getting the hot tag and hitting the Fat Boy dropkick may have been the most sublime moment of the whole show.
All right. Like the most sublime moment in that it was exactly as good as the band Sublime.
Hey, What I Got, that's an okay song. But
I don't practice Santeria.
What I Got is the Arashi's drop kick of Sublime.
That's right.
It's the one thing they have.
Santeria, I think that's a pretty good song. I don't know.
Yeah, actually that is.
Yeah.
Now I gotta play that after we finish the show because it's gonna be stuck in my head. I know it is. So
never expected to be talking about Sublime on this show, but I blame myself.
Sublime and Arashi, they go together, peanut butter and jelly. I'm trying to find if I have any more notes of this match I've gotten discombobulated. Actually, there's a little bit from the Observer. Working as Muda in full gimmick, the reaction from a crowd clearly filled with Japanese tape watchers was described as similar to a WWE crowd for The Rock or Hulk Hogan. At 41 and with a body destroyed, he didn't do much, but people used to seeing and expecting great main events didn't care as long as they saw his mannerisms. He gave them everything expected: his dragon screw, the green and red mist, one teased moonsault, his power elbow, and the shining wizard. His intro was said to be the biggest reaction in the history of the company. Sorry, Dave, that's just incredible. And his finisher, the Wizard, while it seemed everyone was specifically waiting for it, and which he may have never done in the U.S. before, was described as the biggest pop in the history of the promotion. Arashi wasn't very good, but nobody really seemed to notice.
I noticed. But it is the dream to have a bunch of people like filling an arena just to see my mannerisms. Man, I can't wait to see him blink too much and like awkwardly hold his arms at his side. And those are my mannerisms. So
do you think? This might be a hard question to answer, but do you think any wrestler these days is big enough where like fans will go to the show just to see a move? Like, I'm sure there are some fans that like they probably when they saw that Shining Wizard were like, that justifies the price of my ticket. Just like I know there was a lot of fans during the Attitude Era that were like, if I see a Stone Cold Stunner, like, that makes my night right there. I don't know if there's a single wrestler today that could just do one move and people are like, that's why I came to see here. Like,
Yeah, I think there are wrestlers that people would like love to see like them do their shtick. You know, like I think like Minoru Suzuki like would like draw a big group of people to like just see him like just be Minoru Suzuki. You know what I mean? But like to do a move, no. I think there's not enough scarcity now. Like everything is too available.
Yeah, like if Kenny Omega just did your local house show and all he did was the one-winged angel, you'd be pumped to see Kenny Omega, but you wouldn't be like, that's all I needed to see was just the one-winged angel. Like,
no, definitely not.
Yeah. So that's the one thing I wanted to mention I forgot, and then this jogged my memory, was the moonsault. The thing that you mentioned, and it just made me laugh so hard watching it, is there's a moment in this match where Muta goes for the moonsault and he gets caught. And I think Doug is the one going on this, but he's like, he only does that in big matches. You know, he doesn't do the moonsault in anything but the biggest matches. And then here's the funny thing: he never actually does the moonsault. So like in kayfabe, it's like, okay, Muta thought this was a big match because he at least tried the moonsault. But for everybody who's going to be pretty much Ring of Honor's entire fan base, who knows this match is a work, at the end of the match you're thinking he never did the moonsault, and they just told us he only does the moonsault in big matches. So it's kind of like they buried themselves, which just kind of made me laugh. I was like, wait, he never did the moonsault. Not that I expected him to do it, but...
Yeah. So I wonder if he was doing it at all in 2003.
I'm not sure. It's wild. That feels like over half my life people have been saying, like, Muta and The Undertaker are the two people that, for over half my life, people have been like, I can't believe he can still walk, and then he keeps wrestling year after year after year.
Yep.
Like, it's just don't believe anything that doctors say. That's the great message I'm sending you from this podcast.
I feel like with a bunch of measles outbreaks out there, this is not a safe thing to be telling people.
Be like the great Muta, don't get immunized.
No, I do not endorse this message.
Okay, after the match, Muta wants handshakes. Moth goes to give one, but Daniel stops him, and instead he has the Prophecy bow to Muta, which I thought was a nice little way of Prophecy showing respect, but they're not breaking their like dick credo of never handshake anybody.
They're not breaking their dick credo.
A little dick credo with some nice sharp cheddar. That's good snack.
I don't know what to say.
I thought Dick Credo sounded like some Italian food, and so
that's not how I was thinking of it.
Next, we go backstage, or Chicago, as Gary Michael Capetta might say, for Good Times, Great Memories. Colt's guests are Special K. He only has one chair for them, which Dixie gets, so I guess that once and for all settles that Dixie is the high man on the Special K totem pole. Colt lets Special K know that the Carnage Crew are looking for them. Becky Bayless turns up for the first time since being given away to Raven in that weird segment a few shows ago, and Colt gives her Dixie's chair so he can ogle her breasts and make boob jokes until the Carnage Crew find Special K, run them out of the room. DeVito says this is no joke and things have gotten personal. He says he has a 13-year-old daughter that didn't come home the other night. She went to a rave and someone slipped her ecstasy. And I just thought, shouldn't you be mad at yourself for letting your 13-year-old daughter go to a rave? Like, or go out late on a weekend or whatever? And then DeVito says his family may be crappy, but they're still his family. And Loke says now they don't care about pinning Special K, they're going to kill them.
I'm going to have to say, I think I might be on DeVito's side here. Yes, be mad at yourself, but also be mad at the grown man that kidnapped your 13-year-old daughter and gave her drugs and possibly did other even more horrible things. You know what I mean? Like,
well, also, does he even know Special K did it? And if Special K did it, how does Special K know what DeVito's daughter even looks like? I
don't know, but this is going to a pretty dark place if they're portraying his daughter as 13. You know what I mean? Like that's really young to be it does basically just makes Special K into real monsters.
And it's maybe just an angle too dark for wrestling because 13-year-old gets drugged by adults at a party is. Yeah. Maybe that's too serious for pro wrestling. I
also very badly timed for Ring of Honor.
Yeah, between this, if we were getting the award for most ironic happenings in a year, I think we'd still have to give it to Tradition Continues for being the one show that didn't have man-on-woman violence and being called Tradition Continues. But the number 2 runner-up would be this show having both an award for the classiest promoter of the year, and also this about an angle about like underage being drugged, and also even like the part where Gabe got mad about a woman getting attacked. Like lots of irony on this show.
That's true. That's a good point.
So we cut backstage to end the show with a super echoey hallway promo.
I actually like the echo here. I know it's just bad production, but I thought it actually added a cool effect.
Yeah, the effect was kind of cool. Although part of me thought like it distracted me in the sense of I was thinking, couldn't you find it anywhere else in the building that didn't have this echo?
Yeah, yes, of course.
Like a lot of Ring of Honor backstage promos have weird things where it's as if someone like thought, should we do take two? Should we like walk 5 steps? And someone just said, no, we don't need to do that. like little things that could be easily fixed.
Yeah.
But so anyway, Moff is still pissed about the Whitmer thing and swearing on his father's grave and being made a liar. Daniels is fed up with that. He says, I didn't tell you to swear on your father's grave. At the end of the day, the prophecy is my show. These are the choices I made. And then the prophecy cue a countdown from an off-camera Gabe. So they did yet again, for like the 100th time, we don't know we're being recorded, and now we're going to do the promo proper, and we're going to act different than we did. Like, does the prophecy never buy Ring of Honor DVDs? Do they not know that like they've done this before? Because then they act like they're all together.
Although Moff still sort of acts a little bit like off.
He's giving the stink eye to BJ.
Yeah, so I at least appreciated that.
And then the prophecy started doing this promo. Daniels cuts a promo. He brings up how Steve Corino's group tried to stop the prophecy earlier this year and got destroyed by the prophecy. Daniels reminds us that the prophecy held all of Ring of Honor's titles earlier this year, and he puts over Dan Moff as their backbone. Moff says Daniels has his loyalty. Daniels frames BJ Whitmer as Xavier's replacement in the prophecy, and BJ says Daniels also has his loyalty. BJ says he'll never forget what Punk did to him at Epic Encounter, and says there was no greater sight that he's ever seen than Lucy face down in a puddle of her own blood, so that's pretty creepy. And then Moff doesn't like that Whitmer's talking about that, so in the background of this promo, you can see him start to stare daggers at BJ as Daniels finishes his promo, and Moff goes as far as even to just mouth "fuck you" to BJ, like in the background as this is going on, and that ends Final Battle 2003, and that ends Ring of Honor 2003. So, Matt, what did you think about the show?
It was really good. No matches of the year. I liked the first half probably overall more than the second half. But, the second half was entertaining. It was a shame what happened to Homicide. But there were some really good matches on here. I thought the booking was overall pretty good. I did mostly like the big angle with Prophecy and Whitmer and all that stuff. I really liked the opener. I really liked the Fight Without Honor. I thought there was a decent amount of pretty good wrestling on here. And I thought the crowd was super hot. I thought the atmosphere was good. The production was good. I thought it was a very good show. Not like I don't know if it's anything I'd say you need to go out of your way to see, but it was certainly an important show for ROH. It was very successful, and they seemed like a hot product. There were definitely been plenty of better shows in 2003 than this one, but I thought this was probably the best one in a while. The best one probably since the summer.
I like the show too. I feel like it felt like an event, like a bigger event. It felt like what it was, which was one of the biggest shows they had ever done up to this point. And even the card felt loaded, even if not every match lived up to expectations. I thought having an 8-match card instead of a 10-match card, and there was no real. It was every match either was a feud or like a quote unquote dream match with foreign talent.
Yeah, there was no filler on here, and that's almost unheard of in ROH.
Yeah, so that made it feel special. I think the first half of the show, barring the Whitmer Striker match, which even that was not as bad as maybe some people remember, or maybe as bad as it was live. I really enjoyed the first half. And the second half had some entertaining stuff too, and even when it wasn't like the greatest matches, it was still the novelty of the show was fun to me the whole way through.
I agree.
And so I feel like if you can get into that part of it, it's a really fun show. If you just are only into strict, like, I just want to see great matches, I don't care about anything else. There's some very good stuff here. I don't know if there's anything, like, absolutely must-see, but I think it's a fun show. So that sums up the show, and since we ended 2003, now before we can get into what we thought about 2003 as a whole. Now, before we give an awards and look over some other awards, I actually thought we should just talk a little bit about 2003, because one thing I always kept in mind, Matt, was when we were going into starting this year, you talked about how 2003 was like one of your favorite years in Ring of Honor, and I believe you said it was like the year you had rewatched the most of. And I always thought that 2002 was like the year everyone remembers because it was the start of Ring of Honor and so many firsts. And 2004, like 2007, is thought to be the prime. 2003, I feel like kind of gets lost. Like, people don't talk about it as much. So I'm just wondering, Matt, like, based on rewatching this, did anything change for you? Like, was it better than you remember, worse than you remember? Anything, like, stand out to you?
I think some of the strengths, became clearer, and some of the weaknesses definitely became clearer. Like, when I would do rewatches in the past, it wasn't in order, so the trends weren't as obvious. Like, it's very clear to me that the spring of 2003 was a real, like, early peak of ROH in terms of, like, hitting on creative cylinders, the shows being good, a lot of characters getting over, things like that, and, like, the fall and early winter of 2003 being kind of a slowing down period where it's clear that they need to make some changes, because the booking kind of gets a little bit, kind of loses its way a little bit, I guess I can say. But, certain wrestlers stood out. Like I said, Xavier was a lot better than I remembered, things like that. And, when I would do rewatches, it's not like I would rewatch the undercard. So, like, stuff like Hot Stuff Hernandez, suddenly, one show looking like he was the star of the future and the next show looking like he was not. Things like that. But overall, it's still one of my favorite years. I think there's so much fun stuff, and I think it's when ROH really establishes the identity that would carry it through to, into 2004 and, like, kind of, the identity that it still has to this day. I think it really found its pacing and its, I don't know, it seems corny to say its voice, but you know what I mean. Like, its identity, I guess, in 2003.
I feel like we've been on a real journey with 2003, and not just because we've been reviewing it for over a year of our lives, and it's taken us that long, and we've spent a lot of time thinking about it. But I know at the start of the year, I feel like the tone of our shows sometimes was like, boy, Ring of Honor is really consistent now, and every show is entertaining, and the undercards are better, and, like, every show we were almost, like, surprised, like, man, I can't wait to watch the next one. And then I feel like the last few shows, we did kind of fall into that rut where we were like, well, there's still some good matches, and it's not like these shows are terrible, but there's something missing. I feel like maybe late 2003 is the first rut that Ring of Honor's ever fallen into.
Definitely, yeah.
It's not even like it's bad, it's just it needs some kind of shot in the arm. There's something missing.
Yeah, so the rut shows, like the shows in, like, the last quarter of 2003, still are way better than almost any show in 2002 in terms of, like, just, like, overall quality. It's just that it's just not popping the way it did.
And I think another reason why also is, I remember something I told you on one of the shows early in 2003. I was saying, some of those early 2002 shows felt like they were so built around low-key Daniels and Danielson that if one of those guys missed the show, it would have really hurt the show. And I felt like in early 2003, the company had finally gotten enough talent and enough depth that it didn't really matter who missed a card. Like, they were always putting out entertaining shows. But I was almost thinking, like, talking to you back then, I was like, it's almost like now it doesn't matter how many pieces of talent can't make a show. Like, they're always going to come up with a consistent level of quality. But I feel like maybe I brought the karma on me retroactively, because I think in the second half of the year, you did kind of finally have enough talent leave where you noticed it. Because in the second half of 2003, Danielson barely wrestled this year for Ring of Honor, and then low-key has his injuries and falling out, and Paul London leaves after the first half of the year, and I felt like you can make a case those are the three best wrestlers Ring of Honor had access to at that point. And I felt like Gabe's, in the second half of 2003, Gabe's trying to book all these new guys, like the second wave. He's trying to push Whitmer, he's trying to push Stryker, he's trying to push Jimmy Rave, and I feel like it's the first time where it's just like he doesn't have the answers. Like, these aren't the right guys, and you kind of miss the people that have left. It's the first time I missed the people that had left.
Yeah, I could see that. Especially, I mean, London especially.
Yeah, like I feel like if you had like London on these shows, there's probably not a rut.
Maybe not. You know, London himself might have gotten into a rut also. You know, but you know, he never had to go through that period, so he didn't. You know, like it's hard. It's very hard to say. I think a lot of it is the booking. The booking lost focus. The face heel dynamics got all messed up. I think a lot can be blamed on that as well.
And I think it's surprising, like that the year was as good as it was when so many things didn't go right. When you consider that, like, the low-key homicide angle that didn't go anywhere, the group versus prophecy angle that ended up like completely crapping the bed because Carino got arrested. It probably wouldn't have been that good even if he hadn't gotten arrested. Or like the Field of Honor. Like, there's a lot of things that went wrong this year that didn't pay off or have a satisfying ending. But yet, I still think this was like a fun year to watch.
I thought it was a great year overall. Still, I would still say that, despite the latter part kind of falling off a little bit.
So that speaks to something about how many good things happened. Where even with, I can name all those bad things and be like, well, it's still a good year.
Well, they were just a really classy promotion, you know.
And and I think you appreciate more if you watch 2002, because I don't think we can emphasize enough. 2003 Ring of Honor is just much better undercards and like a much more momentum show to show, and it feels like by late 2002, early 2003, Gabe has kind of figured out his formula of how he wants shows to be, and at that point, it's less about throwing stuff on the wall and more just like filling these blocks in the formula. Like, this is going to be my Spot Fest match for this show. This is going to be my big angle for the show, and he kind of knows the format. He's gotten comfortable.
Agreed.
So after that, before we go into our awards, I did one little weird, really regrettable, geeky thing, which is I went, Matt, and I looked up the attendance listed in the Observer of every Ring of Honor show thus far, and came up with a couple stats. It's so geeky and dumb, but I did it, and I will mention before I read these things out, we know that the Wrestling Observer attendance, we've had some anecdotal messages from people that were there. Maybe not always the most accurate attendance, but I think at least keeping it just to the Observer at least keeps it kind of consistent. So I thought it'd be interesting just to see some numbers and some patterns. So just came up with a couple stats. In 2002, Ring of Honor ran 12 shows. They sold 5,250 overall tickets. They averaged 437 fans a show. Their highest attended show was All-Star Extravaganza with 525 fans, and their lowest attended show was Round Robin Challenge with 325 fans. Now, by comparison, 2003, they did 20 shows, so they did 8 extra shows. They drew 11,900 fans, so more than double the fans. They averaged 595 fans a show instead of 437. Their highest attended show was Final Battle 2003 with 1,500 fans. Lowest attended was a tie between West Mifflin's Revenge of the Prophecy and Round Robin Challenge 2, which both drew 300, and that's probably why they never went back to West Mifflin after those 2 shows. And I thought the one interesting other thing was 10 shows in 2003 drew more than 525 fans, which was the record attendance for Ring of Honor in 2002. So, even though they were losing money, apparently hand over fist, like at this point, they were getting more popular. And other than that, I guess we just have the awards, and then we have some other awards, I think, from the Observer and the Torch, which I thought would be fun to go over. But for those who haven't been listening, last year we did 5 awards. This year we're only going to do 4 awards because one of the awards was Best Surprise, and I felt like this year there wasn't enough surprising things to make a Best Surprise award. Maybe we'll bring it back in the future, but we will do Worst Thing of the Year, Best Match of the Year, Best Show of the Year, and Wrestler of the Year. And the one other change we've made is last year we did top 3 for every award. This year we've expanded Wrestler of the Year to top 5 just because I think it's more interesting and there was enough really good matches to warrant that. And finally, me and Matt did not tell each other what we did in the award, so it's going to be new to us. We don't know what each other has voted on, and I'm just going to go to it. Worst Thing of the Year. I'm going to also go over what we did in 2002 just for some comparisons. So In 2002, Matt, your number 3 was poor commentary. Your number 2 was consistent man-on-woman violence. And your number 1 was the rampant homophobia of the opening of Era of Honor Begins. My number 3 last year was Donnie B. I just wrote Donnie B, his existence. 2 was misogyny aplenty, all the man-on-woman violence. And number 1 was the opening in-ring segment of Era of Honor Begins, rampant homophobia. Matt, what was your third worst thing in 2003 Ring of Honor?
My third worst thing was unfocused booking in the latter part of the year. Just a lack of real feuds. Like there were certain shows where we're like, we don't even know. Like I don't even know what the feuds are. Like I don't even know what I'm supposed to be looking forward to here. And just like very confusing heel face dynamics. Whether it was the Prophecy and the Second City Saints, Samoa Joe and the Briscoes, different things like that. Just a lack of focus in the booking that kind of led to some less than exciting prospects for the future.
Yeah, definitely agree there. My third worst was the second and third Ring of Honor riots. Not the first one, because, like, the first one, I don't think it's this amazing thing, but I think it's a cool novelty. Like, it was different than anything Ring of Honor had tried. It got people talking, and it is kind of like this interesting little moment. But what some people people remember the first riot. I don't think what people remember, and I certainly kind of had forgotten, that they did a second riot and a third riot on the next 2 shows, and they were like the dollar store versions of the original riot. They were so much smaller, and just the fact that they were repeating them like completely got rid of the mystique of the first one. Like some people actually thought the first riot was legitimate, and then they decided to repeat it 2 more times. It was as if Ring of Honor like convinced people that like lightning struck the ring, and then they said, let's do it on every show. And people were like, that's going to give it away. And they're like, no, this is great. And I wrote this on the episode at the time, but I think Dave Meltzer sums it up best. They did another fake riot. It was a bad idea, although it made for a good visual on the home video the first time a month ago. It was totally lame the second time. It was preposterous to even conceive of doing it a third time, so they did. Not only that, but they did it twice on the same show. Crowd hated it, chanting, "Fuck this," and "No more riots." If a crowd is chanting "Don't do something" anymore, that's probably pretty bad. So that was my third worst. Matt, what was your second worst of 2003?
My second worst thing of 2003 was the SAT's washing machine. I can't think of another situation where a single move has definitely knocked somebody out on 2 separate occasions and probably also hurt people a bunch of other times. This was not something that should have been done, and it was just bad news.
The fact that they did it, they kept doing it after they knocked the guy out, and I realized they did slightly modify the move because they let the guy's hands go free after they first knocked out the first guy, but I still feel like maybe just don't do that move ever again, guys.
Exactly.
So that's a good choice. My second worst of 2003 was basically what your 3 was, kind in a way. I just wrote the lack of clear faces and heels. Anyone that's listened to recent shows knows we've just really gone on how unclear the faces and heels are. And I know people can say, oh, it's shades of gray, it's nuance. It doesn't come off like it's intentional nuance. It comes off as they want it to be faces and heels, but they just like forget about it a lot or only hold to it when it's convenient. And even if you just listen to our review of Final Battle 2003, there are multiple moments of like, who is supposed to be the face in the Prophecy versus Second City Saints feud? Is it the people that attacked Lucy or the people that threatened to kill Allison Danger? Like, and if people can say, oh, it's a heel versus heel feud, they already did a heel versus heel feud with the Prophecy this year with the group.
And a heel versus heel feud is not going to be the top feud in a promotion. Sorry. That's never going to work.
And if they did one heel versus heel feud, I could say, okay, that's intentional. They've been doing quite a few of them. So, yeah, just not good. And Matt, what is your worst thing of 2003? I have a feeling we're both going to have the same thing.
Yeah, it's, the general, like, just like last year, the general misogyny and violence against women, whether it's the constant attacking of Allison Danger and trying to murder her, the calling Becky Bayless a slut, so people can forcibly kiss her and saying that she should like it, the pile driving women through tables to incredible cheers, the pile driving of Ariel through a table, even though like you're supposed to be heels because it excites the crowd so much, you're trying to get Alexis Lurie over as a serious wrestler, but then also talking about her, quote, cute little tummy multiple times during a match. It was just so much gross shit over and over and over again, to the point where there's literally only one show that didn't have man-on-woman violence. This was just overwhelming and constant, and it just was like a barrage and assault on everything decent. It was just too much. Man, it was just too much.
And I agree. My number one is also the man-on-woman violence streak. When we started doing the show, we knew there'd be man-on-woman violence, but we never talked about going in. We just talked about, hey, let's do this fun podcast. I did not know it was going to be enough that we would be able to start a streak. I did not know that streak would continue into 2003, and I certainly didn't know that at the end of 2003, I'd be able to tell you that 31 of the first 32 Ring of Honor shows had man-on-woman violence, and it's just, we've talked so much about it, it's exhausting. It's great that we've come, that wouldn't be acceptable nowadays, and it's crazy that we've had to come so far in just the last 15 years. It's crazy that this was acceptable in 2003, and it's crazy that they pressed that button so often. Even if you think we're doing this to shock you, man, because it's supposed to be offensive, it's not offensive. It's less offensive and more sad. It goes back to repeating the riots thing. When you do it every show, it stops being shocking. It just starts being weird. And
it also clearly wasn't supposed to be offensive. It was supposed to be crowd pleasing. So that's not even a valid argument either. It's funny because nowadays the big debate is intergender wrestling okay? But at least that's like a whole separate debate because there's this idea of consent. To the violence in that situation versus it being done to somebody. And it's still I don't know what the answer is, but it's a very different situation than what we see here.
Yeah. So now that we've gotten rid of the negative, we have nothing but positive categories for the rest of the way. So show of the year. Last year, I had as my third favorite show of the year, Scramble Madness. Number 2 was Road to the Title, and number 1 was Honor Invades Boston. Matt, for 2002, you had Scramble Madness as number 3 as well. Honor Invades Boston number 2, and All Star Extravaganza was your show of the year. So my third favorite show for 2003 was the show we just watched, Final Battle 2003. I don't really have to say anything. We literally just said why we liked it. So Final Battle 2003 is my third favorite show of 2003. Matt, what's your third favorite show of 2003?
That's a good choice. My number 3 is the 1-year anniversary show. I thought it just had a lot of variety of good stuff. It had that first Riot, which was, not bad, kind of cool at the time. Had a very good Danielson versus Samoa Joe match. It had a good Briscoes versus Briscoe match. Had that great multi-match segment with Paul London where he wins this really cool 3-way against AJ and Loki, and then has this great emotional near title win against Xavier. Terrible last match, but certainly memorable in that endless scramble. But it was one of the first ROH shows that felt like a big, epic show. The crowd was hot for it. There was just a huge variety of good stuff. Really, really loved that show.
My second favorite show of 2003 was Death Before Dishonor. I felt like it going to what you said about the first anniversary show, it felt like an event. And looking at my top 3, I think all the shows I picked this year were shows that just felt like big events this year because the quality was fairly consistent, so I just wanted shows. The shows that jumped down at me were the ones that felt bigger. And, even though it didn't, I guess the 4-way was really great. That was one great match, but it also had things that just felt memorable and special, like Punk Raven in the dog collar match. I thought was a good match and felt like a really cool moment in that feud. Paul London was the first ever big goodbye in Ring of Honor history, and his match with Samoa Joe wasn't the greatest match those two could have had, but it was solid. Even the Jeff Hardy thing was at least memorable. So I thought just a memorable, enjoyable show, Death Before Dishonor.
My number 2 show was Do or Die. It featured some of the first really show-long booking from Gabe as far as starts with this big angle with Homicide and Low Key and and Low Key doesn't like Julius Smokes, which culminates at the end of this really amazing main event between Samoa Joe and Homicide for the title, where Smokes and Low Key are are fighting, and that allows Joe to win the match with the Muscle Buster. Also has good match between Matt Stryker and Tom Carter. It's like kind of a coming out party for CM Punk, where he does like multiple good promos, highlights a big wide variety of talent. I just thought it felt like a really great paced, like well booked, super hot crowd show with a great main event. I love Do or Die. I highly recommend it.
And my favorite show of 2003 was Matt's third favorite. It's the 1 year anniversary show. I felt like Final Battle 2003 and Death Before Dishonor, my 3 and 2, they're like shows that feel major, but they don't have that one like super great match. They have some very good matches, but not that great match. And then there are other shows that I felt had that great match, but didn't feel like super major, like special shows. I feel like 1 year anniversary show was the one show this year where you didn't have to pick. It felt like a super special show, and it had some really good matches. But I also think the two Paul London matches, the low-key AJ London three-way and the Xavier London match, were both great. So I felt like you kind of got everything. You got great matches and good matches and cool, weird moments like the Riot. And you had a 30-minute scramble where Gabe and Doug spent half of it talking about anything but the scramble and basically like reading books. And it's my favorite show of the year.
And my favorite show of the year is your second favorite show of the year. Death Before Dishonor, still one of my all-time favorite ROH shows. Like you said, like it wasn't the best wrestling show they ever did, but there was a lot of good wrestling. But they packed in the great moments, from Low Key's big return to the return of Xavier. Well, no, I'm joking, kind of, but it turned out to be an important thing. But the Great Four-Way, Jeff Hardy, it didn't go well, but man, was it memorable. The Punk and Raven dog collar match with the crazy surprise ending with Tommy Dreamer coming out to that amazing reaction, to the farewell of Paul London, like you said. It basically just took, like you said, the 1 year anniversary felt like a big show. This just took that to another level with more big moments, better production. It just felt epic. And like we had mentioned at the time in the review, it was like that example of that show that should have been way too long. But since it was novel to have a show that long at the time, it didn't feel too long. It just felt like they were just giving you more. And that's always a great feeling. And I thought just everything clicked that night. It was kind of the culmination of a really hot run for ROH in terms of they just put out really good show after really good show, and this was like the WrestleMania, like the end of that season. And then things kind of were downhill a little bit after that, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that really was kind of like the beginning, not of the end, that sounds too bad for 2003, but
yeah,
that was kind of a peak in some ways.
It definitely was.
Right. So, match of the year, 2002, I said Mark Briscoe versus Jay Briscoe from Honor Invades Boston was my third favorite. My second favorite match of the year was American Dragon versus Low Key from the Round Robin Challenge. And my favorite match of the year was American Dragon versus Low Key versus Christopher Daniels, the three-way from The Era of Honor Begins. Matt in 2002, he knew his third favorite was. He wasn't guessing at what his third favorite was. Matt knew for a fact that Matt Feuerstein's third favorite was Christopher Daniels versus Low Key versus Doug Williams versus Spanky at Crowning a Champion. His second favorite match of 2002 was AJ Styles versus American Dragon from All-Star Extravaganza. And his favorite match of 2002 was American Dragon versus Low Key from Round Robin Challenge. Matt, what was your third favorite match? It's top 5 this year again.
That's right.
You're getting bonus. Matt, what was your number 5 match of 2003?
Oh, this was really hard, just so you know. I don't know if it was hard for you, but coming up with 5 even was really hard. So I'll just really quickly go through a bunch of matches that I considered for my 5th spot.
Go ahead.
Samoa Joe versus Christopher Daniels from Glory by Honor 2. I was wrestling with that one, pun intended. Also, Paul London versus Xavier from the first year anniversary. I was considering even Christopher Daniels versus Doug Williams from Night of Champions. I had on my list. I ended up for number 5 picking Paul London versus AJ Styles versus Low Key from the 1 year anniversary as my 5th choice. I just thought that was so innovative. I remember we talked about at the time, like if somebody had done that match move for move in 2018, it wouldn't seem antiquated in any way. And when you have a match that's that ahead of its time and holds up that well, you got to give it some props. I did think that there were kind of some slow spots near the end, but man, what they did was so impressive. I had to include it on the list.
Matt, sometimes we occasionally have little like disagreements of opinion, obviously on most shows, which helps make it interesting. But we also agree a lot. I feel like this is like probably the most newlywed game moment we've ever had, because you talked about Paul London versus Xavier. My match that just missed the cut was Paul London versus Xavier, and my number 5 match is AJ Styles versus Low Key versus Paul London from the 1 year anniversary show. So we have the same number 5 and the same, like, almost just made it. And everything you said, it's I believe I said at the time, if you put this match in PWG today, it wouldn't seem old fashioned. And there's a lot of matches that are timeless in wrestling because they're story based, and like stories are timeless. But this is a match that's just based around crazy spots, and the spots are so cool, and the execution is so cool that it's timeless, and that or not timeless. It holds up 15 years later, and that's crazy because that's the one thing that ages the quickest is like spots, because the bar is always being raised with spots. But this match is just. It's a spot fest that, like you said, way ahead of its time. So, Matt, what's your number 4? Let's see if we can go 2 for 2 on lining this up.
All right, it's going to be tough. My number 4 is Paul London versus AJ Styles from Night of the Grudges. I really loved how different it was. I loved the work, the arm work. I loved they kind of had to improvise a little bit on the finish because of AJ being the NWA champion, and they came up with this interesting draw finish, which pissed people off, but still worked in its own weird way. And Paul London, was doing his he was getting his character down, almost like healing a little bit. They were doing a lot of stalling and mind games. It was different from the other great matches of the year. And it was maybe the culmination of Paul London's great run. But it was really interesting and really good, and highly recommended.
Matt, I swear on my life, my number 4 is AJ Styles versus Paul London.
Wow.
Night of the Grudges. So, everything you said again. This is a great match, and what I love about this match is it's the great athleticism and cool spots you'd expect from these two, but it really does tell a great story. It's really good body part work. It plays directly into the finish where AJ can't hold a bridge on a suplex because all the work Paul London's done on his body, and it causes the double pin and the draw. And even though that wasn't their original plan, I feel like it's actually one of the most satisfying double draws I've seen in quite some time in wrestling. And I thought Paul London's work on AJ Styles' legs and was just really inventive. He wasn't just doing submissions. He was he did the shooting star press onto the leg. He would do all sorts of different kinds of new moves, specifically targeting the leg. Just great match. I really enjoyed it. Matt, can we go 3 for 3? I bet you we're going to disagree because I bet you have what I have as 3 higher. But what is your 3rd favorite match of 2003?
Yeah, I have a feeling we're going to have the same top 3, and I have a feeling that the order is going to be quite different. But we'll see if I'm wrong. My number 3 is Samoa Joe versus Homicide from Do or Die. I thought this match was awesome. I thought that they were just throwing bombs. I thought the crowd was going nuts. I said at the time this was the first Samoa Joe title match in terms of he has a type of match, and this was the first version of it, and it's one of the best versions of it. And the storyline was great with Homicide. He's fighting for everything he's got for his son, and low-key, slaps him into shape, and it's the debut of the Muscle Buster because Joe just can't do anything to put this guy away except for that. And, man, it's awesome. And I love it, and it is my 3rd favorite match of 2003.
The streak is broken because my 3rd favorite match of 2003 is Bryan Danielson versus Paul London, 2 out of 3 falls from the Epic Encounter. Going into rewatching all the shows this year, this was my favorite Ring of Honor match of 2003. I thought it would be again, and I feel like maybe if I rewatched, if we did, if in a crazy alternate dimension where we redo all the shows, maybe it would be again, because I feel like even though I still love this match, my expectations from my memory were so high that it almost made it slightly disappointing, because I remember at one point this match was one of my favorite matches in all of wrestling. But it's a great match. It's just Paul London is one of the greatest baby faces ever, of this generation. Bryan Danielson is just one of the greatest wrestlers. Period. He's great at just being a jerk, but it's also just there's nothing. I guess the only thing why I have it at 3 is it's just a great wrestling match. And saying just a great wrestling match, it sounds kind of stupid, but they didn't really have a feud, even though they had a couple matches. There's no extra emotion. It's just a great straight up wrestling match. But as far as those go, like one of the absolute best of the year. Matt, what's your number 2?
My number 2 is Paul London versus Bryan Danielson, 2 out of 3 falls from the Epic Encounter. Yeah, I agree with everything you said about it. I liked that it was just this epic struggle where everything they did just seemed like they were working for it and working for it. I loved London's, just his passion and how much the crowd, like the debut of the dueling chant, like, come on. That's such a big deal. It was awesome. There was just this one element of emotion that I like to have in a match that was better in another match, I guess is how I would say it. So that is why it's not my number 1.
Yeah, and I have a feeling we're going to have the same number 1, because my number 2 is your number 3. Mm-hmm. We just switched on our 3 and 2. Matt, we were so close, I think, to having the exact same top.
I know, amazing.
A Homicide versus Samoa Joe from Do or Die is my number 2. If there's one thing that I was surprised at how much more I liked it on rewatch, it's not that I ever thought this was a bad match, but I couldn't believe how much I loved this match on rewatch. I remember it got to the degree that when we were doing the Do or Die episode of this podcast, you were like, boy, you really like that match. I haven't heard you get this excited, Trevor.
That's right.
And it is a great match. It's the first Joe match, like Matt said, to feel like that epic Joe-style match. It almost feels like a bit WWE-ish because it's got so much drama and emotion to it with Low Key at ringside. And even the squabbling with the Low Key and Julius Smokes at ringside distracting Homicide, I felt like actually added to the match. And the work is so good. It's just so hard-hitting and so exciting. The debut of the Muscle Buster. But more than all that, if someone asked me what's your favorite just moment of 2003 Ring of Honor, it's when Low Key slaps Homicide during the middle of this match, and Homicide basically hulks up and has this huge near fall where everyone in that building thought Homicide was about to win the title. It's just this amazing like 30-second moment. It feels like Hulkamania for jaded indie wrestling. Like a real Hulk up that's like, it got me excited again. Even though I knew he wasn't going to win, I loved it. And Matt, I think you should tell everybody what our favorite match of 2003 is, because if it's not if we don't have the same first match, this podcast is over at this point. You don't have this in your top 5. So,
well, it is.
What's our favorite match?
As I'm sure it is for you, Slick Wagner Brown versus Oman Tortuno.
Yeah.
Yes. It is Homicide versus Steve Corino. Strong style match, as Homicide said, from Bitter Friends, Stiffer Enemies,
Yes.
In Connecticut. The first show in Connecticut, and man, what a way to debut it. Just the most intense brawl with the most crowd heat of the year by far. To the the visceral hatred between these two guys, to the point where, and I hate to bring this up as like a positive for the match, but it does show you how intense it was. Homicide literally slapped Steve Corino's ear so hard that he stopped being able to hear in that ear. Not a good thing, but it does illustrate something. But between just a shocking amount of violence, but in a way that just seems so believable because of the way the wrestlers sold it, where Homicide was just carving Steve Corino's arm with barbed wire, but also just the moves that they did and the submissions and the fact that at the end Homicide won because Chuck LeGrand threw in the towel, and the way they played the storyline was that Carino wasn't even mad about it. He appreciated how much his friend cared for him. Like, just that degree of emotion, and just everything just felt so natural. Everything felt so intense. The best Steve Carino match I've ever seen. Maybe even the best Homicide match I've ever seen, honestly. I'd have to think about it more. But it was incredible. It was just, I mean, go back and listen to the show that we did. We talked about it for a long time. People have praised that segment.
Yeah.
You know, like, we were elevated just by talking about that match. So I think we owe that match this award just for that. But yeah, amazing. Incredible match. One of the best brawls you'll ever see.
Yeah, just a fantastic match. And like looking at my list, Bryan Danielson versus Paul London in a straight up wrestling match is a great match. I've seen other great straight up Bryan Danielson matches. Homicide versus Samoa Joe, as we've said, is like one of the first Samoa Joe Ring of Honor matches that feels like one of his epics. We've seen other great Samoa Joe epics. Even like the three-way that we had at number 5, we've seen other great like spot fests. There's nothing really, when I look over Ring of Honor history, that quite feels like Homicide versus Steve Carino. It is so intense, but at such a like measured pace, but it feels gritty and real in a way. It's, as I talked about, I think, on the review of that show, it's a match full of weapons and you know, crazy things, but it doesn't feel like those things are the guest stars. They support the match. They're not the whole reason for the match. And it's this magic moment where they didn't have this kind of chemistry in their first match, and while I think they always had this cool chemistry after this match, it was just like one magic night. They never got to this place ever again.
No, it was the stars aligned, as they say.
Yeah, it's just there's nothing, in my opinion, quite like. I mean, there's been other great brawls, but there's nothing quite like it in Ring of Honor's history. This kind of match, it's just a special match, a special night, and if you haven't seen it, you should go out of your way on eBay, on the dark internet, find a copy of the show, Bitter Friends, Stiffer Enemies. It is a fantastic match. So, and it is the first time in 2 years we can say it's not Trevor's favorite match of the year or Matt's favorite match of the year. It is through the years official, cannot be argued with, 2003 match of the year.
Absolutely.
So, Wrestler of the Year is our final award. Last year, Matt, your third favorite wrestler of the year was AJ Styles. Your second favorite was Low Ki. Your first favorite was American Dragon, Bryan Danielson. Last year, my third favorite was American Dragon. My second favorite was Christopher Daniels. And my number 1 was Low Ki. So this year, my third favorite wrestler of 2003 was Paul London. And Paul London at number 3 was my hardest choice of any award because last year I had Paul London as my honorable mention for, no pun intended, for 2002 because I felt like his second half of the year was amazing, but because he didn't really have a first half of the year, I couldn't put him in. And I was looking at this year and going, it's the same thing in reverse. He had an amazing first half of the year, and then he literally is not part of Ring of Honor for the second half of the year. And I thought to myself, I know I love Paul London, and I feel like I've said this before, if you took the second half of 2002 and the first half of 2003 and put that as 1 year, that's the best year anyone has had in Ring of Honor so far, in my opinion. And I felt like if I just put him at 3 just because I want that, that's not really being true to like that's what my heart wanted, Matt. It's not what my brain wanted. But then I thought, even though Paul only worked the first half of the year, I looked at my match of the year for this year. I had Paul London and Xavier at 6, which was my first one left off the top 5. Then Paul London was in the 3-way at 5. Paul London was in the AJ match at 4. And Paul London was in the Bryan Danielson match at 3. So Paul London, even though he only wrestled half the year, was in 4 of my 6 favorite matches of the year. Like, at that point, I can't deny him. So I'll just say, Paul London, I've said this a few times, it is a goddamn travesty that Paul London's career and his love for wrestling got snuffed out by WWE, because I think Paul London was a generational talent. I think if he had stayed this good in Ring of Honor for a few years, we'd be talking about him like we talk about AJ Styles or Bryan Danielson or anyone else. He was that good. at being a babyface, at being an underdog, at being a crazy fine wrestler that also had the fundamentals. He was even showing his charisma in 2003. And if he had had a second half of 2003 as good as his first half, he would have been not just my wrestler of 2003, but like not even close. So half a year, but Paul London's my third favorite of 2003. Matt, what's your third favorite?
My third favorite wrestler of 2003 is Samoa Joe. He took the title to a new level already. Created this great character, just this no-nonsense, just champion who, epitomized confidence. And, he was like, I am the voice of this promotion, and he really carried that mantle. And at the beginning of the year, I don't think anyone would have expected that. I don't know how early Gabe decided that he was going to go with Joe, but, I think it was a surprise to most people that he ended up being what he ended up being. Even by this point in time, 2003, he already was a very definitive champion. And as far as matches, well, he had started the year with 2 really good matches against Bryan Danielson. He, had a couple of okay matches at the beginning of his title reign, but then he had that amazing match against Homicide. He had this really good sprint against Dan Moff. He had a disappointing but still good match against Paul London. Another, pretty good match against BJ Whitmer. A good match against CM Punk that was non-title. He had a great match against Christopher Daniels. Really great match. A shockingly good match against Jay Briscoe. Another very good match against Homicide. Great tag team match with AJ against the Briscoes. In my opinion, a great match against AJ. So, he was just very consistent all year. And considering the way he elevated himself and the title, I think that he definitely deserves a spot on the top 3.
And my number 2 wrestler for 2003 is Samoa Joe. And just what you said, I think the key word in everything you said is consistency. Like, 2003 was a year that was Ring of Honor was pretty consistently entertaining, but they were also in flux in a lot of ways. A lot of angles that kind of didn't go the right way. A lot of movement in the roster. And Samoa Joe, to me, is like the consistent thread throughout the year, where you could just always count on him to put in a great effort, usually have a very good match. He was always cutting like good, solid, short little promos. And just, it felt like in the second half of 2003, Gabe's trying different angles, and he's pushing new guys, and he's like trying to find like new things to kind of give new spark to the company and new directions to go in. And like the one thing that on all the shows that kind of doesn't get touched is just Joe, because it's just like you just take for granted, like, oh, that's one thing we don't have to worry about. Like Joe in the title it's in a good place. We can always count on him. We don't have to worry about him. And what a gift. If I was like Gabe, this is probably, I'm sure it probably was, the year I fell in love with Samoa Joe, because it's like, oh, thank God. Like, he's just always shows up on every show, always consistent, so good. Like, it's the one thing you don't have to worry about is Samoa Joe.
It's a great point. My number 2 is Paul London. Despite him only being there for half the year, what a half the year, those matches that he's had were not just good. They were like so many of them were great. So many, almost all of his matches are in my top 10 for match of the year. Whether it's the match against Xavier, whether it's the first 4-way at the Revenge on the Prophecy, the 3-way at Anniversary, the match against Danielson, right? That's like my second best match of the year. The match against Styles, which is the 4th best match of the year in my opinion. And your opinion, actually. A match against Red, like that little short match at the Round Robin Challenge where he gets to be a heel and he does the arm drag into the kick. Like, man, like that was good. The match against Daniels at the Round Robin Challenge. Like, just every match he was in was a match of the year candidate, in some either big or small way almost. And he had the crowd emotionally invested in him like nobody else. He was just the defining guy on the indies in the first half of 2003. And the rest, no one could take that away from him in the second half of the year, in my opinion. He was just that good.
I love that, like, I debated in my head so much, like, oh, am I making a reach with London at 3, even though he's in a half a year? And then, like, you have him higher than me, so yeah. I shouldn't have worried at all. But, yeah, I mean, in a way, it's almost to his benefit that like he only did half a year, because it almost makes what he did more impressive.
Exactly.
Like, he had probably more great matches this year than guys that worked twice as many shows.
Way more.
Yeah.
He had more great matches than Samoa Joe, and I love Samoa Joe, and I thought he had a great year, but London just had those higher peaks.
I really do think this. If you put the second half of 2002 to the first half of 2003, Paul London, as 1 year, that is probably one of the greatest years a wrestler has had in a promotion, match quality wise, at least on the indies, probably of the last 20 years. Like, just, it is his ratio of great to not great is off. Like, not even like good to not great. I mean, good to not good. I'm talking about great, like top end matches.
Yeah, it's untouchable.
Yeah, fantastic. And my Wrestler of the Year, we might be sympathetic on this, we'll see. That's Homicide. Is the 2003 Wrestler of the Year. So yeah, our Wrestler of the Year is Homicide. Another guy who just very consistent, and this was the year. I feel like in a year where Ring of Honor, one of our complaints is how bad the face heel stuff is, he was the one guy that pulled off being like the anti-hero tweener naturally, where you're like, it feels good that Homicide's this way. You shouldn't. He's too lovable to be hated, and he's too like edgy and like kind of violent to be loved. He just had, going to like the Paul London thing. Paul London had six of my six favorite matches of the year. Homicide had my two favorite matches of the year. So from match quality, he also, in that four-way at Death Before Dishonor, that was great. I mean, I'm sure you'll reel off. There's other matches he was great in. But I also feel like Homicide versus Carino was my favorite feud of the year. Well, that or Raven or Punk. It's close. I just feel like Homicide. I remember a shoot interview Christopher Daniels did, or no, Samoa Joe did, where he said Homicide tries to give you something special every time out. No matter what I thought of a Homicide match this year, there is only one match he had this year where I thought he was not giving 110%, and that was versus Chris Sabin at Wrath of the Racket, and that was on a show where he had to work double duty, so he might have been holding back. Every other show, I always felt like Homicide was like not holding a thing back. He was just working his ass off, taking crazy bumps, trying his hardest. Even on matches where like the chemistry, he had a match with Daniels this year where the chemistry didn't line up. I never thought Homicide wasn't trying his absolute hardest. And also just the kinds of, like, the most versatile wrestler. He can work the mat. He can do flying with the crazy Tope con Hilo. He could do like a weapon brawl. He can do like a hardcore match with Dusty Rhodes in a crazy like 10-man tag. He can do like your standard big work rate epic, whatever. It's just most versatile wrestler the company had.
Yeah, the versatility, the variety, like that's what I definitely want to emphasize with him. Like you said, so he could either have the epic world title match, like the one against Samoa Joe that we both love so much, the insane, like intense, brutal, like blood feud brawl with Carino that was our match of the year, or an even darker, more twisted version of that in the barbed wire match that we just reviewed on the last show. He could have these big, like, indie style, like, bomb throwing kick out fests, like the one he had with BJ Whitmer at Main Event Spectacles. That was better than it had any right to be. He could do these really, like, fun, non-stop action four ways where he's clearly the star of those matches, like the one at Death Before Dishonor and the one at Revenge on the Prophecy. He could have these really insane, just like big spot, like plunder spot fests, like the one he had with Trent Acid at Wrestle Rave, and then another just insane, like, mess of a psychotic entertaining match that he had with Trent Acid at Beating the Odds. Just like one great then just another version of a really good match against Samoa Joe at Empire State Showdown, which we both thought was a very underrated match. He had so many really good matches, and when he wasn't there, the rare times he wasn't there, you missed him. But that didn't happen very often because he was always there, and he was having these really good matches. And yeah, I mean, just what a year he had. The way they put him over back then, it was not hyperbole. Like, he was something special. It's amazing to me that him and Joe were not signed by TNA sooner. Like, I don't know what they were waiting for with those two, or maybe they just didn't want to go. I don't know.
It's sad that Homicide, he eventually did get, everyone knows he got eventually a TNA job, but it's sad that he never got the career his talent deserved. If he was 4 inches taller, I think he would have had a completely different life.
That's true of a lot of wrestlers, but yeah, he's one of them.
And he's just so good. And the one thing that really bugged me, I go back and I do a lot of research for these shows because I'm a big old dork. And one thing that really bugs me reading a lot of 2002, 2003 articles is the number of people that weren't watching indie wrestling or who watched just a tiny bit who was like, oh, is that Homicide just a New Jack ripoff? Like someone, I think like Jason Powell from the Torch even brought that up in a thing with Gabe, and Gabe had to be like, no, like he's not New Jack, and
nothing even close to being like New Jack. Yeah,
you could not compare a more one-dimensional wrestler to a more multi-dimensional wrestler. Like it's polar opposites of this. And I'm not saying bad things about New Jack. Don't hurt me, New Jack. I'm saying New Jack is good at one kind of thing. Homicide was good at like 10 kinds of things. They are like the opposite ends of a spectrum. And it's wild that because they both had dark skin and wore like Tupac bandanas, that somehow people for a couple of years were like, oh, clearly this guy's ripping off New Jack.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Just watch one Homicide match and one New Jack match, and you will know that they're not at all like...
Yeah. Also interesting is a lot of people consider 2003 like the year of CM Punk. We both did not have CM Punk in our top 3.
No, but he did have... He was definitely the promo of the year if we were going to do that by far. He had either the best or second best feud of the year. So no one's dissing CM Punk, but based on the awards that we give, yeah.
His promos were good. I feel like he was a guy this year match-wise. He hit a lot of doubles. He didn't really hit a lot of home runs.
No. I'm sure he would admit that. His home runs were in IWA Mid-South. If you want to see a great 2003 CM Punk match, watch the 2 out of 3 falls 90-minute match he had against Chris Hero. That match is shockingly good. Anybody doing a 90-minute match to be able to be entertaining is amazing, but those two did a really good job.
Or even like the 40-something minute, I think, like TLC match he did with Chris Hero watch any Chris Hero CM Punk match in IWA Mid-South.
That one was 02. That one was 02, but yes, the point stands.
Yeah. But I mean, those are examples of maybe he was a guy that, especially because he was working so often with Raven, he had more to give in the ring that maybe he could show in Ring of Honor, although he did not have a bad year from a wrestling standpoint in Ring of Honor either this year.
No, not at all.
He just missed my top 3.
Yeah, let's see what 2004 has in store for CM Punk.
He might have a couple good matches this year. But so now to wind down, I thought we'd do what we did last year, a little fun thing where we just go back and revisit how Ring of Honor did in the Observer End of Year Awards. And I also found this year some PW Torch Awards. And I thought it's just a little goofy way to wind down. And now that we've given all our thoughts, to see how other people thought. Because remember, just like I said last year, unlike the Pro Wrestling, I keep calling it the Pro Wrestling Observer. Unlike the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame, which is voted on just by a panel of people that Dave chooses, any subscriber to the Wrestling Observer could vote on the year-end award. So you're getting a real picture of what like the smart, nerdy fans, but all of them felt about wrestlers and what about Ring of Honor. So I'm just going over the awards that Ring of Honor was in. Most Outstanding Wrestler, which is not the Lou Thez Award, which is supposed to factor in drawing and work. Most Outstanding was just work. Kurt Angle won in 2003. AJ Styles finished 8th. Paul London finished 13th. Bryan Danielson finished 14th. So that's the Ring of Honor thing there. Feud of the year, Brock Lesnar versus Kurt Angle won. Raven versus CM Punk finished 2nd. So pretty big and just a feud that was only in Ring of Honor and MLW. Tag Team of the Year, Naomichi Marufuji and Kenta won. The Briscoes finished 13th. So Briscoes, I think, first time that they get on that award. It won't be the last. Most Improved Wrestler, Brock Lesnar won. AJ Styles finished 8th. Homicide finished 14th. CM Punk 15th. Paul London 20th. So a bunch of Ring of Honor guys there. Most Improved has always seemed weird to me because a lot of times I felt like Most Improved turned out to be for a lot of people just the person I noticed this year, not always the most improved. Best on interviews, Chris Jericho won. CM Punk finished 5th. Raven finished 8th. CM Punk finished ahead of Ric Flair and Kurt Angle, Steve Austin, and Vince McMahon. That's a pretty good list of people to finish in front of.
Damn.
Best technical wrestler, Chris Benoit won. Bryan Danielson finished 4th. Doug Williams finished 7th. I can't imagine, like, Doug Williams was another guy kind of get lost in the shuffle, didn't get a lot of opportunities to wrestle stateside, so... Brawler of the Year, Brock Lesnar won. Raven finished 2nd. Homicide gets 6th. Samoa Joe gets 7th. Steve Corino finished 11th for that. Best Flying Wrestler, Rey Mysterio won. AJ Styles 2nd. Teddy Hart finished 3rd. Probably like the highest placement for Teddy Hart in his career on any award. Amazing Red finished 7th. Paul London finished 8th. Most Underrated, Ultimo Dragon won. Our old friend Spanky, Gone But Not Forgotten, finished 2nd. Christopher Daniels finished 4th. Paul London finished 9th. Doug Williams finished 16th. Finally, all right, next up we get Promotion of the Year. Pride Fighting Championships won. It's MMA. Pro Wrestling Noah was 2nd, so that makes it the top-ranked pro wrestling promotion of the year. Ring of Honor finished 3rd. So, very high ranking for Ring of Honor. Funny thing, shows you how times have changed. New Japan finished 11th.
It was not a great year for New Japan. I can remember that.
Yeah, this was like the downturn, but I have a feeling some kids today who are like, oh, Dave, like all those observer marks, they just all they care about is New Japan. Like, go in a time machine and see how things can change, because they finished 11th. Match of the Year, Mitsuharu Misawa versus Kenta Kobashi in Tokyo on March 1st. Bryan Danielson versus Paul London finished 7th. Or no, 5th, actually. 5th. Homicide versus Steve Corino from Bitter Friends, Stiffer Enemies finished 14th. So a couple of our favorites did chart. Rookie of the Year. Now, this is one I told Matt. I spoiled Matt on this months ago because Matt told me, I think on one of the shows, he was like, boy, Chris Sabin, I remember him being really good in TNA, but there's just something about Ring of Honor he's not good in. Chris Sabin won Rookie of the Year in 2003. You know who finished 2nd? Zach Gowen. You know who finished 3rd? Shinsuke Nakamura. Behind Chris Sabin and Zach Gowen. Alex Shelley finished 6th. We haven't gotten to see much of him yet, but we'll start seeing a lot more next year. Worst television announcer, Jonathan Coachman won. Chris Lovey finished 12th. So congratulations to Chris Lovey.
You are not even the 10th worst. Good job.
Best major show, Ring of Honor's 1-year anniversary show finished 8th. Let me just see here. Death Before Dishonor finished 12th. And The Epic Encounter finished 15th. Reader's Favorite Wrestler, always a weird generic award. Paul London 6, AJ Styles 10. Kurt Angle won that. Booker of the Year, Jim Cornette for his work in OVW. Gabe Sapolsky finished 2nd, above Misawa, Dutch Mantel, Paul Heyman, Joe Silva, Dave Lagana, and Vince McMahon. So, pretty good for Gabe. Promoter of the Year was Nobuyuki Sakaibara, who's the promoter of Pride. Number 2, Rob Feinstein. Now, this always tickles me, because obviously no one knew at this time. Rob Feinstein was voted as the Wrestling Promoter of the Year. 1, the promotion wasn't that big. 2, we'd find out in a few months, he had lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And he finished ahead of Misawa, Vince McMahon, Ultimo Dragon, Dana White, pretty crazy. And finally, Matt, maybe my favorite one, Best Gimmick, John Cena won. CM Punk, Straight Edge, finished 2nd. You know who finished 6th for Best Gimmick? Special K. Special K ranked in an Observer Award. I did not remember that. Good on them.
Wow.
Dave wrote in the Observer Awards that CM Punk was the shock of the awards, finishing high in several categories, even though his main promotion, TNA, didn't even push him. So, shows you the strength of Ring of Honor. In going to the torch quickly, Bruce Mitchell had AJ Styles versus Paul London as his 3rd best match of the year. He also thought it was Paul London's final match in Ring of Honor, which it wasn't, so poor Bruce getting a little confused. Wade gave Paul London versus Bryan Danielson his 4th best match of the year, and he just raved about it. I won't read his whole review, but he just... loved it. He said this 42-minute match featured a lot of the elements that made Triple H and Shawn Michaels that they were recently praised for in their end-of-the-year Raw match, except more daring and even better. He says, let me see if I can find here. London is praised, rightly so, for being a throwback in how he approaches his matches. His realism first, high spot second approach, despite being fully able to pull off many dazzling high spots, is what won him a WWE contract over many other flashier cruiserweights on the indie scene. Danielson is even more of a throwback. He looks like a wrestler transported in a time machine from 40 years ago. Finally, Bruce Mitchell had the Rising Star of the Year, and he picked the entire Ring of Honor promotion as his Rising Star of the Year. He wrote finally at the end, pick any wrestler that is used in both Ring of Honor and NWTNA. Ring of Honor is using that performer much more effectively. Ring of Honor is a fresh new breeze in a promotion genre that needs one desperately. I started to notice in the last couple of months of research, this is when people started really comparing Ring of Honor to TNA in the newsletters over and over again, and basically saying Ring of Honor was better. And let's just say that sentiment might come back to haunt Ring of Honor in a few months when they need TNA to maybe be understanding about something. So that's the year, and I want to thank everybody for listening to us, supporting us. I want to thank Matt most of all for putting up with me. And if you want to contact us, at Trevor Dame on Twitter, at MayorMGF on Twitter, ThROH@gmail.com. That's THROH. And message boards like Pro Wrestling Only, Voices of Wrestling, Figure 4. We have threads for the show that I read. And Matt, is there anything you want to add?
Nope, just thank you for listening. Thank you for putting up with me. I can't wait for 2004. It is an epic year in so many ways for ROH. Wow, what a ride it's going to be. You thought 2003 was crazy. 2004 is fucking crazy.
Yeah, this is when, so much crazy stuff. This is when Ring of Honor really, I guess what some would consider hits their prime. It also has a story that almost kills Ring of Honor that we'll have to go into, and just so many amazing things. It is so exciting. It's the year I started becoming a regular fan of Ring of Honor. And it's going to be more shows, more episodes. I can't wait. And thank you, everybody. And we'll see you again, starting with 2004. And the battle lines are drawn. We will kick off 2004 with the next episode, and we will see you then.